There is a particular quality that most Pokemon villains share, one that becomes visible only when you have moved through enough of them and started to feel the pattern beneath the surface variation. Each of them has, at some point before the events of their respective games, looked at the world and found it lacking in a specific way, not vaguely, not in the abstract. They have identified something real, something that an honest person looking at the Pokemon world could recognize as a genuine problem. And they have constructed, around that genuine problem, a philosophy that leads somewhere terrible. The tragedy is not that they were entirely wrong in what they saw. It is that what they chose to do with what they saw became something no vision of the world should ever become: justification. And before you drift any further, please consider subscribing to join the Cozy Club for more journey like this, and let me know where you're watching from tonight. This is the lore of the Pokemon villains, told slowly the way these things deserve to be told, in the long hours when the day has finally finished with you and you are ready to let something else take the weight for a while. These are the organizations, the leaders, the ambitions, and the quiet wreckage they left behind in every region they touched. Listen without urgency. There is enough night left for all of it. Giovanni did not begin with villainy in the way that the Pokemon world usually tells its villain stories. He was, before he was the leader of Team Rocket, a gym leader. He held the position of Viridian City's final gym challenge, which placed him at the end of the path every Kanto trainer walks toward the Indigo Plateau and the Elite Four. This is not a coincidence in the architecture of the story. The final gym, the one that provides the Earth Badge, was held by a man who was simultaneously running the largest criminal organization in the region. The duality tells you something about how Giovanni understood the structures of the world. They were surfaces, arrangements of appearances. What mattered was what you actually controlled, not what your title said. Team Rocket, as an organization, has a business model that is, compared to the ambitions of later villainous teams, relatively modest. They steal Pokemon. They sell them. They use those funds to expand their operations and acquire more resources. Giovanni wants wealth and power, and he has found that Pokemon are the most efficient currency both things can be traded in. In the Kanto region, where the games begin, Pokemon are woven into every aspect of life. They are partners for ordinary people, tools for professionals, subjects of scientific research. A well-organized group willing to treat them purely as commodities would find the market extremely favorable. The operations Team Rocket runs in Kanto reflect this commercial logic. They occupy the underground waterways of Cerulean City and the cave systems of Mount Moon, gathering fossils and Pokemon in ways that disregard both the law and the well-being of the creatures involved. They move into the Pokemon Tower in Lavender Town, a site of genuine cultural significance in Kanto, a place where Pokemon are mourned and their memories honored. To Team Rocket, it is a location with natural defenses and a history of avoidance that makes it useful. They are not interested in the emotional meaning the tower holds for the people of the region. They are interested in what is practical. The headquarters they have built beneath Celadon City is a more sophisticated expression of the organization's self-understanding. It is not hidden because they are ashamed of what they are. It is hidden because visibility invites interference. Team Rocket's underground facility is functional, organized, guarded. It processes the Pokemon that are acquired through field operations and converts them into whatever form of value is most useful at a given time. The grunts who work there wear uniforms and follow orders. There is a bureaucratic quality to the organization that reflects Giovanni's background. He has not built a mob. He has built a company with a particularly aggressive approach to acquisition. The assault on Sylph Coccus is the point at which Team Rocket's ambitions become visible at their fullest. Sylph Co is described in the context of Kanto's lore as the most important technology company in the region and possibly the world. Their products include the Sylph Scope, which allows the detection of ghost-type Pokémon, the Pokeball at various levels of sophistication, and ongoing research into item development and Pokémon interaction. The Master Ball, the perfect capture device that functions without fail regardless of what it is directed at, is the jewel of their current research. Giovanni wants it. With a Master Ball in his possession, no legendary Pokémon would be beyond his reach. The occupation of Sylph couriers is coordinated in a way that the earlier rocket operations were not. Grunts are stationed at every floor. Communication is controlled so the company president is held. The goal is not destruction or demonstration. The goal is the master ball, and the operation is sized precisely to obtain it. This specificity is Giovanni's signature. He does not do things for effect. He does things because they serve a clearly defined purpose. A 10-year-old player character walks into this situation with a team of Pokemon they have been training since leaving Pallet Town. They have defeated every gym leader they have encountered. They have moved through every obstacle Team Rocket placed in their path by the straightforward method of being, in terms of their Pokemon and their will, stronger than anything sent to stop them. The player defeats Giovanni in Sylph Co., recovers the Master Ball, and the operation collapses because its leader was the only thing holding it together. Giovanni takes what remains of his dignity and withdraws to the Viridian City Gym, where a final confrontation occurs before he disappears entirely. The aftermath of Giovanni's defeat is a study in organizational entropy. Team Rocket without Giovanni is a series of grunts who still believe in the mission without having anyone to tell them what the mission is. They continue to operate in small ways, to run individual schemes, to exist as a loosely affiliated group of criminals with nowhere in particular to go. And then, 3 years later, in the Johto region, some of them come up with a plan that reveals more about the organization's psychology than anything they did in Kanto. They take over the Goldenrod City radio tower. Their purpose is to broadcast a message, not to the region, not to the public as a show of force, but specifically to Giovanni, wherever he is, asking him to come back. They are conducting a public demonstration of private grief. The radio tower, the most powerful communication broadcast tool in Johto, becomes a personal message in a bottle sent to a former leader who may no longer exist. The Johto rockets are, in their way, the most human portrait of what an organization looks like after it has lost the thing that defined it. Giovanni does not return during the events of Johto. The player character defeats the remnants of Team Rocket again, and the organization splinters into something too diffuse to call itself organized. Giovanni's fate remains for years one of the more interesting open questions in main series Pokémon lore. The game suggests, in various ways, that he is alive, that he has not simply accepted defeat. The presence of Silver, the rival character of Gold and Silver, who is eventually revealed to be Giovanni's son, adds another layer to the question of what happened to the man after Kanto. He left. He abandoned not just his organization, but his family. Whatever he was doing in the years between the collapse of Team Rocket and the events of Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, he was not in contact with the people who might have wanted to find him. In Rainbow Rocket, the post-game arc of Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, Giovanni appears as the anchor of the assembled villain team. He has been pulled from a timeline where his plans succeeded, where Team Rocket was never stopped. This version of Giovanni has a Mega Mewtwo at his disposal, a level of power that the Kanto games only gestured toward as a distant ambition. He is, in this version, everything he was trying to become, and the game does not present this as an obviously happy outcome for him. Success has not resolved the quality in Giovanni that made him Team Rocket's leader. It has simply given that quality more room. He is still organized. He is still precise. He is still interested exclusively in what is useful to him. Nothing about victory has made him different. It has only made him more of what he already was. The Mewtwo connection in Team Rocket's story is one of the more philosophically interesting threads in the organization's history. Mewtwo's origins, as presented in the game lore and expanded in supplementary materials, involve Team Rocket's scientific division cloning the fossil of the legendary Mew and then subjecting the clone to a series of enhancements designed to maximize its battle power. Mewtwo was created as a weapon. The research notes included in the Pokémon Mansion on Cinnabar Island describe the process in terms that are clinical in their language and unsettling in what that language contains. A conscious being was created for a specific purpose, was never given a context in which to understand itself except through the lens of what it could do in a fight, and eventually rejected the context entirely by destroying the laboratory in which it was born and leaving. Giovanni's later use of Mewtwo in Cerulean Cave in the original games treats it as a powerful but ultimately controllable asset. The game frames the encounter as a straightforward legendary battle, but the Mewtwo movie and various anime materials suggest that the relationship between Mewtwo and Team Rocket, between this created consciousness and the organization that created it, is something darker and more interesting than a captured Pokemon. Mewtwo remembers being made. It remembers what it was made for. Its anger at humans is not irrational. It is the response of a conscious being that was denied, from the moment of its creation, the basic courtesy of being treated as something other than a tool. This is, in the context of Team Rocket's wider story, an accidentally precise summary of everything wrong with the organization's philosophy. They look at Pokemon and see resources. They look at legendary creatures and see power waiting to be acquired. They look at a cloned being with demonstrated consciousness and see a weapon that got loose. The consequences of treating the world this way accumulate, and not all of them can be defeated in a battle. The legacy of Team Rocket in the broader Pokemon series is one of the most enduring of any villainous organization. They appear in Kanto and Johto in the main games. They are referenced in connection with Rainbow Rocket. Their model, using Pokemon as pure resources, shows up in various forms in later organizations that replicate parts of their structure without the history. The Rockets are the baseline villain. Every subsequent team is, in some sense, defined partly by how they differ from what Team Rocket was, whether they are more ideological, more personal, more apocalyptic, or more tragic. They are all measured against an organization that wanted money and power and was willing to hurt anything in the way of getting them. What makes Team Rocket endure is that their motivation is the most recognizable one in the entire Rogues Gallery. They are not trying to destroy the world. They are trying to get rich and powerful in a world that has Pokemon in it and treats them as the primary unit of value. The horror of what they do is not located in the scale of their ambitions, but in the mundane clarity of their methods. They steal, they exploit, they treat living creatures as goods. In a world that has built its entire social structure around the opposite premise, that Pokemon are partners rather than property, Team Rocket is the persistent counter-argument. The proof that the partnership model has never been universal, and that there are always people willing to treat the relationship as purely transactional if they believe the returns are good enough. The Hoenn region sits on the intersection of two geological systems that have been in conflict for as long as the land and sea have existed. The tectonic energy that produced the islands and continental shelf of Hoenn is ongoing and active, expressed in the volcanic activity of certain areas and the unusual depth of the surrounding ocean. The mythology of the region encodes this tension in the legends of Groudon and Kyogre, two creatures that represent the opposed forces of land expansion and ocean expansion at scales that make ordinary geological time feel brief. These creatures fought, according to Hoenn's oldest stories, until the sky dragon Rayquaza descended and drove them both to dormancy. The world that existed after their conflict settled into the balance that all the current civilizations of Hoenn were built on top of. Team Magma and Team Aqua each decided independently and for different reasons that this balance was wrong. Maxi, the leader of Team Magma, is a man who has thought carefully about resources. His intellectual framework is, at its core, Malthusian in impulse. He looks at Hoenn and sees a region where human and Pokemon civilization is constrained by the geography. The ocean covers a vast percentage of the world's surface area. What grows from ocean? What endures on its surface? Ships and fish and temporary things. Land, in Maxi's analysis, is where civilizations build. It is where agriculture takes root, where cities rise, where human ambition can leave permanent marks. And there is not enough of it. The volcanic energy of Groudon, which the legends describe as capable of evaporating ocean and expanding landmass, is not just mythology to Maxi. It is a solution waiting to be deployed. What Maxi does not account for in the initial version of his plan is the ecological interdependence of everything the expanded land would replace. The ocean is not just a surface, it is a system. It is where the water cycle begins and ends. It is where a significant portion of the region's Pokémon live, hunt, reproduce, and die. It is the medium through which weather systems form. To evaporate significant quantities of it is not merely to convert liquid surface to solid surface. It is to unravel something that took millions of years to calibrate, and Groudon at its full ancient power is not a precise geological instrument. It is a force of nature, which means it operates at the scale of nature. It does not stop where Maxi's plans end. Archie, Team Aqua's leader, has come to his philosophy through something that feels, in some versions of his characterization, more personal than Maxi's intellectual framework. He loves the ocean. This is not a metaphor. The games, particularly in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, invest significantly in establishing that Archie's relationship to the sea is emotional and deep, that his anger at what human civilization has done to natural environments is connected to something he actually experiences when he is near the water. His philosophy of restoring the ocean to its ancient dominance is not a cold calculation about resource allocation. It is the conviction of someone who looks at a natural environment and feels genuine grief about what is being lost. Team Aqua's argument with Team Magma is, on the surface, a dispute about the direction of the same fundamental error. Both teams want to use legendary power to forcibly alter the world's geographic balance. But beneath that structural similarity is a real ideological difference that the games take seriously. Maxi's worldview centers human civilization and its requirements. Archie's worldview decenters human civilization in favor of the natural systems it has disrupted. Neither position is without merit in observation. Human civilization does consume environments. Land expansion does come at ecological cost. These are things a person with reasonable intelligence and genuine attention can observe in the Pokemon world as easily as in the real one. The failure of both leaders is not in what they observed, but in the solution they reached for. A solution that involved awakening creatures of mythological power that the ancient legends themselves described as having nearly destroyed the world the last time they were active. The overconfidence required to believe you could direct that power, rather than simply unleash it, is the specific form their failure takes, and both of them, in the climactic sequences of the games, are forced to watch what they actually did rather than what they planned to. Groudon Awakened does not care about Maxi's vision of expanded civilization. It is the embodiment of geological force, and geological force does not have policy goals. It expands. It dries, it burns. The weather changes in ways that threaten not just the Pokemon in the surrounding ocean, but the people of Hoenn and everything they depend on. Kyogre, awakened, does not implement Archie's ocean restoration agenda. It floods. The rain it summons is not rainfall. It is the beginning of submersion. Neither leader possesses the means to direct what they have woken, because the creatures they woke were never subject to human direction. The red and blue orbs, the artifacts used to awaken them, were called containment instruments in the lore, not control instruments. The distinction was everything. The player character's role in Hoenn is to address the consequences of these awakenings, to find Rayquaza, the original mediator, or to enter the Chamber of Origin and confront the legendary creature directly in a way that can restore balance. The nature of the player character's power in these moments is worth considering. They do not have the geological authority that Groudon has, or the oceanic mass that Kyogre represents. They have Pokemon they care about, and a willingness to stand in front of something enormous and not run. The games suggest that this is enough, not because the player is supernaturally powerful, but because the legendary creatures respond to the quality of being encountered honestly rather than pursued for extraction. Maxie and Archie in the original Ruby and Sapphire are relatively underdeveloped as characters. They have their philosophies and their Pokemon and their defeat, and the games move on. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, which were released in 2014, both characters received significant expansion that made them considerably more interesting. Maxie, in the remake, is shown as someone who has followed his own logic with absolute consistency. He is not hypocritical. He does not secretly love the ocean or privately doubt his position. He has made calculations and arrived at conclusions and proceeded from them with the kind of certainty that genuine intellectual conviction can produce. The moment his plan goes catastrophically wrong is also the moment he has to confront what his certainty cost. Archie's expanded characterization in the remakes reveals someone whose passion has curdled in a specific way. His love of the ocean is real. His grief about environmental damage is real. But somewhere in the process of converting that genuine feeling into an organization with a plan, the feeling began to serve the plan rather than the other way around. The Team Aqua that exists by the time of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire is not a conservation effort. It is a power organization that has appropriated the language of conservation. Archie's awakening at the end of the game, when he sees what he has actually done to the ocean he loved, is one of the more affecting villain reckonings in the series. He did not want to destroy the sea. He wanted to restore it, and he cannot reconcile what those two things look like in practice. Team Aqua and Team Magma's relationship with each other is also worth examining. They are rivals in the most immediate sense, competing for access to the same legendary artifacts, working at cross purposes at every turn. But they are also mirrors, which the games are clearly aware of. And when they have resolved to stop what they have started, they do so together. The moment Maxie and Archie stand in the same space and agree that the child who has opposed them is right, and that what they were doing must be stopped, is the closest either organization comes to wisdom. They agree only once. They are still, in every other moment, committed to positions that cannot coexist. But that one agreement, arrived at too late, is what allows them to be useful rather than simply defeated. The Magma and Aqua admins and grunts are less characterized than their leaders, but carry the organizational energies of each team in their smaller actions. Team Magma's members tend toward a martial competence that reflects Maxie's precision. Team Aqua's members have a more chaotic energy that reflects Archie's passion. The teams are staffed by people who believe what their leaders believe, which is either evidence that the leaders are persuasive or evidence that people with certain dispositions find organizations that match them. Probably both. Tabitha on the magma side and Matt on the aqua side are the most prominent admins, and both are characterized by a loyalty to their respective leaders that is genuinely felt rather than merely performed. When everything goes wrong, the admins are there. When both leaders arrive at their moment of reckoning, the admins are there for that too. The organizations survive their leaders' failures because the people who compose them are more than their mission statements. The Ore region, which exists in the Pokemon Coliseum and Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness games, presents a version of the Pokemon world that is quietly the most disturbing baseline setting in the series. Not because anything catastrophically wrong has happened there, but because of what is simply absent. There are no wild Pokemon in Org. The region, which is described as arid and sparsely populated, with most of its settlements being small communities or isolated research facilities, does not have the natural Pokemon populations that every other region takes for granted. Trainers in Ore either obtained their Pokemon from other regions, or they have Pokemon because someone gave them to them. The relationship between person and creature in this region begins already altered by the absence of the ordinary encounter, the tall grass surprise, the moment in every other game when you walk somewhere and the world offers you something unexpected. In this context, the market that Team Cypher identified and exploited makes a particular kind of sense. If there are no wild Pokemon to catch, there are only Pokemon that someone already has. And if you want Pokemon, you need to take them from the someone who has them. Team Cypher did not just steal Pokemon, they modified them. They discovered or developed a process called shadow making that altered the psychological state of a Pokemon in a specific and deliberate way. The heart, as the game's lore describes the capacity for emotion and connection that Pokemon possess, was closed, sealed. The Pokemon produced by this process were called Shadow Pokemon, and they were defined by what they had lost rather than what they had gained. No connection, no bond, no possibility of responding to care with care, only combat. The philosophical darkness at the center of Team Cypher's project is that they were testing a specific hypothesis about what Pokemon actually were. The entire series has been built on the premise that a Pokemon's relationship with a trainer is meaningful, that it is a real connection producing real effects, that the strength a Pokemon develops in partnership is different from the strength it would develop alone. Team Cypher was essentially asking, what if that is not necessary? What if you can produce perfectly effective battle Pokemon by removing the element that the series insists makes everything else work? What if the heart is not the source of power, but just a complication that can be engineered around? The answer the games give is complicated. Shadow Pokemon are effective in battle. They hit hard. They are difficult to deal with in conventional terms. The process works in the narrow sense that it produces aggressive, capable fighters. What it also produces are Pokemon in a state of visible distress. The game represents this through the shadow condition itself, through the way these Pokemon resist interaction, through what happens when their inner turmoil is pushed to its limit in a technique the games call going into hyper mode or reverse mode. The distress is not hidden. It is present in every encounter. Team Cypher's product works and is also, in every interaction with it, clearly showing you what was broken to make it. The protagonist of Pokemon Coliseum, Wes, begins the game by stealing a device called the Snag Machine, which allows Pokemon to be captured from other trainers. This device is Team Cypher's own tool, designed to make their acquisition operations more efficient. Wes uses it to take the shadow Pokemon from the trainers Cypher has placed them with, to begin the process of restoring them. His partner Pokemon, an Espeon and an Umbreon, tell you something about who he is before any exposition does. Espeon evolves from Eevee through happiness, through a bond developed over time during the day. Umbreon evolves through the same bond but at night. Wes has two of them, which means he developed a relationship of genuine affection with an Eevee in each half of the day night cycle. He came out of a criminal organization, but he carried his bonds with his Pokemon through the entire thing. The Cypher peons and admins who populate Colosseum include some of the more distinctive character designs in the Pokemon villain tradition. Ein is the scientist most responsible for the Shadow Pokemon technology, a man who approached the project with the detachment of someone who is genuinely interested in what he is doing and only occasionally troubled by what the interest contains. Myror B, one of the most idiosyncratic figures in the entire game series, functions as a kind of comedy in the midst of the organization's serious project. A man so committed to dancing and his extraordinary hair that his menace is genuinely difficult to locate until you are in a battle with him. Dakim is physical, forward, competent. Venus is theatrical. Nazcor is the formal face of Cypher's leadership, the suit-wearing administrator through whom everything officially flows, while Evis, the actual mastermind, operates with the cover of respectability. The Colosseum at the center of the game, the one Team Cypher has built to showcase their shadow Pokemon in battle against each other, is a precise expression of the organization's view of what Pokemon are. An arena is not a partnership environment. It is a performance space where power is demonstrated for an audience. The shadow Pokemon are not competing in the sense that any of this means something to them. They are exhibits. The Colosseum is Team Cypher's argument about what Pokemon are for, made architectural and public. Pokemon XD, Gale of Darkness, returns to Ore several years after the events of Colosseum and finds that Team Cypher was not fully dismantled. They have had time to improve their process. The XD version of the Shadow Pokemon project is more advanced, producing Pokemon whose hearts are harder to reach. The new protagonist, Michael, is a researcher's son with a different emotional baseline than Wes, younger and more openly idealistic, and the game uses the contrast between them to explore what it means to approach the same project from a different starting place. Michael does not have Wes's history. He does not carry the guilt of having worked for people who did this. He is approaching Cypher from outside, which means he can be surprised by them in ways Wes could not. The Shadow Lugia at the center of XD's story is the most significant statement the Cypher games make about the nature of their project. Lugia is, in the lore of the Pokemon world, a legendary creature of enormous power and considerable sensitivity. It is described as generating storms powerful enough to destroy everything around it when it flies, and it lives in the depths of the ocean to avoid causing harm. Its relationship with its own power is, in canonical terms, one of the most careful in the legendary roster. The choice to subject it to the shadow-making process is not accidental. Team Cypher has chosen a creature whose defining characteristic is restraint and care, and attempted to transform it into a creature defined only by violence. The XD narrative is, at its core, the story of what it takes to undo that. The purification of shadow Pokemon in both Colosseum and XDs is the game mechanic that most directly states the philosophical position against Team Cypher's project. You do not purify a shadow Pokemon by winning battles with it. Winning battles helps, in the sense that it exposes the Pokemon to interactions with a trainer who cares about them, creating accumulations of small trust. But the full process requires the Relic Stone, requires time, requires a trainer who is paying attention to the specific Pokemon in front of them. The purification is a restoration of something that was taken. It does not give the Pokemon anything new. It returns what Team Cypher removed. And the game treats the moment of full purification with a gravity that most victory states in Pokemon games do not. You are not winning something. you are giving something back. Team Cypher's legacy in the Pokemon series is relatively contained because the Ore games exist outside the main series and have not been revisited since XD. But the ideas they introduced, particularly the concept of a Pokemon's emotional capacity as a thing that could be deliberately removed, remain among the darkest the series has explored. The question they posed, whether the heart is necessary, has a clear answer in the game's terms. But the fact that the question was asked, that it was asked by an organization sophisticated enough to build a partial answer through actual Pokemon modification, suggests that the world the games depict is one where the partnership model is neither universal nor guaranteed. Cypher was not unique in seeing Pokemon as resources. What made them specific was their decision to do something about the inconvenience of Pokemon having feelings about it. Cyrus is, of all the villain leaders in the main Pokemon series, the one whose philosophy is most internally consistent. He does not contradict himself. He does not have gaps between what he says and what he does. He has arrived, through a process that the game in Pokemon Platinum specifically illuminates, at a worldview that follows cleanly from its premises to its conclusion, and the conclusion is the end of the universe and the construction of a new one without spirit. The terrible thing about Cyrus is not that he is irrational, it is that he is not. His backstory, as presented in Platinum and expanded through various in-game documents and NPC dialogue, describes a childhood of considerable isolation. He grew up unable to connect with the people around him, experiencing the world's emotional dimension as something foreign and painful rather than something natural and sustaining. The desire that other people had, the ways they reached toward each other and toward things and were consequently hurt when those things were lost or those people left, was not his experience. He observed it from outside, and what he observed looked from that outside like the fundamental source of suffering. If you did not desire, you could not be hurt by unmet desire. If you did not attach, you could not grieve the loss of what you attached to. The solution was not to learn to connect, but to build a world in which the architecture of connection did not exist. Team Galactic is the organization Cyrus constructed to make this solution real. Its public face is a company, an organization that presents itself as interested in energy research and space exploration, which in a world that contains legendary Pokemon connected to cosmic phenomena is not obviously sinister. The grunts who work for Team Galactic are dressed in a style that reads as futuristic and organized, which is consistent with the story they tell about themselves. They are, they say, trying to understand the nature of the universe. This is true in the way that things a person says can be technically true while being fundamentally misleading. What Team Galactic actually does in Sinnoh is work toward the extraction of crystalline gems from the foreheads of the Lake Guardians, the three legendary Pokemon that reside in Sinnoh's lakes. Auxie, Mesprit, and Azelf are described in Sinnoh's mythology as the beings of knowledge, emotion, and willpower, the three aspects of consciousness that the creator Pokemon Arceus distributed across these guardians when it made the lake Pokemon. They are small and unimposing. They are not the enormous, world-altering creatures that Dialga and Palkia are, but they carry what Cyrus wants, and what Cyrus wants is the material component of the red chain, the instrument through which he plans to bind the two great legendary creatures of Sinnoh. The coordinated raid on all three lakes that occurs midway through Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum is one of the most dramatically ambitious criminal operations in the main series games. Simultaneous strikes at Lake Valor, Lake Verity, and Lake Acuity, each one aimed at capturing the Lake Guardian resident there and extracting its gem. The player character can only be at one lake at a time. The other two operations succeed before they can be stopped. Lake Valor In a moment the game treats with appropriate weight, is bombed to temporarily deplete its water, forcing Azelf into the open. The Pokémon that lived in the lake are displaced and die. The game marks this with specific language that it does not usually use for the incidental violence of Pokémon games. Spear Pillar, at the peak of Mount Coronet, is the site where Cyrus brings his plan to completion. The Red Chain, once constructed from the gems extracted from the Lake Guardians, is capable of summoning Dialga and Palkia from wherever in time and space they exist, and forcing them into proximity. This proximity, if sustained, creates a spatial temporal instability that Cyrus intends to use as the mechanism for destroying the existing universe. In Diamond and Pearl, the player character confronts Cyrus here and disrupts the summoning before it reaches completion. The legendary Pokémon break free. The crisis is averted. Pokémon Platinum adds to this resolution the Distortion World, a dimension that exists outside normal space and time, where Giratina lives in its origin form, and where the instability caused by the near completion of Cyrus's plan has created a rip. Cyrus retreats through this rip into the Distortion World. Thus, the player follows. The confrontation there is not a final battle, because the final battle already occurred at Spear Pillar. What happens in the Distortion World is a conversation and an offer. Giratina, in the Distortion World, offers Cyrus something. The nature of this offer is left somewhat open to interpretation, but the game presents it as a possibility. Cyrus could rule this small, empty, spiritless universe, a version of what he wanted. He refuses. The reasons the game gives for this refusal are characteristic of Cyrus in a way that is almost sad in its precision. He does not want to rule the Distortion World, because ruling it would mean accepting a world, even this one, as the context for his existence. His goal was not power over a space. His goal was the elimination of spirit, of the very quality that would make ruling anything meaningful. The Distortion World is spiritless, perhaps, but it is still a place where a person would exist in relation to things, and that relation is the problem he wanted to solve. He disappears into it anyway, apparently choosing absence over compromise. The commanders of Team Galactic each have a completeness to their characterization that the early Pokémon games villains did not always achieve. Mars is the most emotionally invested in the mission, not in Cyrus's philosophical terms, but in a more personal way. She is angry in a way that suggests the mission channels something real. Her anger when defeated is specific, not generic. Jupiter is colder, more analytical, and in various games and supplementary materials shows a capacity for self-examination that Mars does not. She is the most likely of the three to have eventually left the organization and built something else, the kind of person whose intelligence, misdirected toward destruction, might find other directions. Saturn is the most interesting of the three in terms of narrative function. He is present at several of the organization's most significant operations. He carries out orders that he increasingly appears to understand are catastrophic, and in Platinum, he is the one who stops, not because he is defeated, not because he has no choice. He simply decides that what they were doing was wrong, and he says so, and he stops. It is, in the Pokémon villain tradition, an unusual moment of ordinary human decision-making. A person working for a villain organization concluding that they should not be doing this and acting on that conclusion. He is not redeemed in any dramatic sense. The Lake Guardians are still harmed. The events of Spear Pillar still happen. Saturn's refusal does not undo what he was part of, but it matters that it occurred. The galactic grunt culture is interesting in ways the games gesture toward without fully exploring. Team Galactic controls the communication infrastructure of Veilstone City, where their headquarters is located. Their headquarters building is visible from the city's public spaces, large and branded in a way that most villain organization bases are not. The grunts who work for Galactic are paid, apparently, in actual wages. They have something that functions like job benefits. The organization presents itself to its members not as a criminal enterprise, but as a company with a mission, and the mission is framed in terms that a certain kind of intelligent young person might find attractive. We are going to understand the universe. We are going to change it. Come help us. The tragedy of Team Galactic's rank and file is that most of them did not fully understand what they were working toward. The philosophical depths of Cyrus's project were communicated to the people who were stationed at lake entrances or patrolling Veilstone's streets. They knew Team Galactic had a mission. They knew the mission was ambitious. Most of them probably did not know it involved the elimination of spirit from the fabric of existence. And when the organization collapsed, when Cyrus disappeared and the red chain was broken, and Dialga and Palkia retreated to wherever legendary creatures go, when they are no longer being summoned, the grunts were left with whatever fragments of purpose they had arrived with, and no organization to give that purpose direction. The after-story for Team Galactic in various supplementary materials suggests that many of its former members continued to exist in the Sinnoh region, some trying to rebuild something, some simply getting on with their lives. The Pokémon series does not often follow up with the people left behind by a defeated villain organization. They are there, though, in the world the games imply, trying to figure out what you do when the plan to end the universe did not work. N is the most philosophically complex figure in the Pokémon villain tradition, and the complication begins immediately, before any of his arguments are heard, with the simple fact of how he treats his Pokémon. Every Pokémon that battles alongside N during Pokémon Black and White is released after the encounter. This is stated explicitly in dialogue that occurs after each battle with him. He will not keep Pokémon he has captured in captivity. He allows them to leave if they choose. This single practice, maintained consistently throughout a game in which he is nominally an antagonist, does more characterization work than any amount of explanation could. N has been thinking about what he believes for long enough to actually live it. His argument, as he presents it to the player at various points throughout Black and White, is that the relationship between humans and Pokémon, as it currently exists, is a form of exploitation that the culture has normalized. People keep Pokémon in Pokéballs. They direct them in battle. They train them toward the trainer's goals rather than their own. The Pokémon do not choose this relationship. They are caught. N's question, which the game takes seriously enough to repeat in multiple forms across its narrative, is, what does it look like if the Pokémon's perspective actually matters? He is not wrong that this is a real question. The game is not in the business of pretending that asking it is illegitimate. What the game argues against is not the question, but N's answer to it, which is the liberation of all Pokémon from human ownership. The game's answer, offered not through counter-argument, but through the player character's demonstrated practice, is that some relationships between humans and Pokémon are genuine partnerships, that the bond is real, and that what N experienced growing up was not representative of what such relationships can be. N's Pokémon were, by design, injured or abandoned creatures. He never saw what it looks like when a healthy bond develops between a person and a Pokémon who choose each other. But the game is careful not to fully dismiss N's experience either. The Pokémon he grew up with suffered. He absorbed their suffering. He speaks for it with sincerity that the game respects. The player character's legendary Pokémon does not choose them because the player is philosophically correct. It chooses them because their bonds with their own Pokémon are genuine, which is a different kind of argument. The game suggests that the question N is asking has to be answered in practice through the quality of actual relationships, rather than through ideology. Getsis, who raised N and shaped his beliefs from childhood, is the organizational reality behind N's genuine idealism. He is the most purely cynical villain in the main series games. His plan has never been Pokemon liberation. His plan has always been the disarmament of the general population of Unova through the ideological leverage of a genuinely persuasive young man who does not know he is being used. If the people of Unova can be convinced to release their Pokemon, only Team Plasma will retain Pokemon capable of battle. Getsis will control them. He will have a monopoly on power in a region that has voluntarily surrendered its own. The manipulation of N is, in this reading, among the most carefully constructed long-term villainous projects in the series. Getsis did not simply hire an idealist. He created one with specific inputs. He gave N Pokemon that were hurt so that N would have emotional evidence for the suffering he was being trained to speak about. He isolated him from ordinary human society so that his only frame of reference for human Pokemon relationships would be the broken examples Getsis curated. He built N's environment, literally in the castle that becomes the final dungeon of Black and White, as a controlled experience designed to produce exactly the philosophy N arrived at. N was not wrong to believe what he believed, given what he experienced. He had been shaped by someone who needed him to believe exactly that. The moment in Pokemon Black and White, when Getsis's actual agenda becomes visible to the player, is one of the game's best narrative moments, not because it is surprising in retrospect, but because of what it tells you about everything you saw before it. Every conversation with N is reread. Every moment of his sincerity is recontextualized not as evidence that he is naive, but as evidence that he was genuinely betrayed by the only family he knew. The tragedy of N is not his ideology. It is that his ideology was built by someone who never believed it. The 7 sages of Team Plasma are the administrative structure of the organization, the men who manage its operations and serve as Getsis's instruments. In Black and White, most of them escape when Team Plasma is defeated and are subsequently tracked down and confronted by the player character in the postgame. Their fates and the quality of their reckoning vary. Some appear genuinely troubled by what they participated in. Some are captured and presumably face consequences. The Sage Looker, the international policeman who appears throughout multiple Pokemon games as an investigator, is instrumental in tracking down the remaining sages, which is another of his roles in a career defined by showing up wherever the series needs someone to be the voice of institutional consequence. Pokemon Black and White 2, set 2 years after the original games, divides Team Plasma along the ideological fracture that was always present but never expressed while Getsis was in charge. The faction that still believes what N believed, led by Rude and others who took the Pokemon liberation argument seriously, has been quietly trying to do something good with whatever remains of its resources. It assists the player. It helps Pokemon. It does the kind of work that Team Plasma's public mission statement described while Getsis was running the organization exclusively in service of his own goals. The other faction, which Getsis leads from his refuge, has acquired new capabilities and new ugliness. The Plasma Frigate, the organization's flying warship, is the most technically sophisticated military asset any villain team in the series has deployed in the main games to that point. It carries the Colress machine, named for the scientist Colress, who was introduced in Black and White 2 as a researcher interested in maximizing Pokemon potential through external stimulation rather than emotional bonds. Colress is his own interesting character, someone whose research question is structurally similar to Team Cypher's, asking what Pokemon can do when pushed by force rather than care, but who arrives at his own conclusions through a more experimental and less ideological lens. By the end of Black and White 2, having observed what the bonds between the player's Pokemon and the player produce in battle, He is willing to acknowledge that his hypothesis about external stimulation may have missed something. Kyurem, the legendary creature that Getsus weaponizes in Black and White 2, is drawn from one of the more melancholy mythologies in the Pokémon world. The Unova legends describe an original dragon from which Reshiram and Zekrom separated, taking with them the aspects of truth and ideals and leaving behind only the cold husk. Kyurem is that remainder. It is a creature defined by absence, by what was removed from it when something it was part of was split apart. Getsis, who is defined by what he is also split apart in order to get what he wanted, is, consciously or not, working with a creature whose nature mirrors the damage he has done. N's presence in Black and White 2 is brief but significant. He arrives on a legendary Pokemon, either Reshiram or Zekrom depending on the version, and he has clearly been traveling and thinking since the end of the first game. He is not happy. He is not at peace. He is still in the process of figuring out what he actually believes now that the context Getsus built for him has been removed. He does not have answers. But the game's treatment of him in these appearances is not as a defeated villain processing failure. It is as a person who is still working on something, still asking the question that Getsus weaponized but that remains, independent of Getsus, a question worth asking. The legacy of Team Plasma in the broader series is, perhaps more than any other villainous organization, the one most defined by the people it failed. Getsus failed the sages who believed in the mission. He failed the Pokémon that Team Plasma claimed to be liberating, but actually used as instruments in a power grab. And in some sense, by constructing a philosophical argument about human Pokémon relationships that was genuinely worth having, and then using it cynically, he failed the argument itself. The question N asked deserves a real engagement. Team Plasma under Getsus never gave it one. The Kalos region is the most overtly aestheticized in the main series Pokémon games. Its cities are built around art and fashion and culture in ways that the other region's cities are not. Lumiose City, the central hub, is modeled on Paris and carries that reference associations with sophistication, with the idea that how things look matters, that beauty is something a civilization can organize around as a real value, rather than a decoration. Team Flare, the villainous organization of Kalos, emerges from this aesthetic context in a way that no other Pokémon villain team has emerged from theirs. They are stylish in a way that is clearly intentional. Their uniforms are red. Their admins are beautiful. Their leader, Lysandra, is a tall, striking man with elaborate red hair who has been a public figure in Kalos, associated with philanthropy and technology, before he is revealed to be planning genocide. Lysandra's argument, as he presents it in the climactic portions of Pokémon X and Y, is a demographic one. The world has finite resources. The number of people and Pokémon consuming those resources is growing. If nothing changes, the world will eventually be depleted, and everything living in it will die in a collapse rather than a choice. Lysandra's solution is to make it a choice. The ultimate weapon, if fired, will eliminate most of the world's population, leaving only those Lysandra has deemed beautiful enough, worthy enough, to survive and begin again. He wants to make the world eternal by making it smaller. He wants to preserve what he loves by destroying most of what exists. There is a specific quality to Lysandra's madness that makes him different from the other villain leaders in the series. He genuinely loved the world. His origin story, which is elaborated in various supplementary materials and through NPC conversations in the game, involves a person who looked at human suffering and human waste and experienced real anguish about them. He tried philanthropy. He tried building systems that would help people share resources more equitably. And he arrived, at some point, at the conclusion that the problem was not any particular social arrangement, but the quantity of people who created the demands that no arrangement could satisfy. The jump from caring about suffering to planning mass death to eliminate it is a particular kind of moral failure. But the failure is not the absence of feeling. It is the presence of a feeling, care about the world, that somewhere became a feeling about which parts of the world deserved to continue. The Team Flare scientists, who developed the technology Lysandra uses and who have clearly been working toward this goal for some time, represented a different kind of participation in the project. Zerosik is the most prominent, a man whose engagement with the ultimate weapons technology appears to be genuinely scientific in motivation. He is interested in how it works. He is interested in what it can do. The question of what it should do is, in his operational context, someone else's department. This division between technical capability and moral evaluation is one of the quieter horrors of Team Flare's organizational structure. The people who built the weapon and the person who decided to use it were not the same people, which allowed each group to maintain a version of its own hands being clean. The Kalos region's history is necessary for understanding the full weight of what Team Flare is attempting. 3,000 years before X and Y, a war consumed the region and devastated it. The conflict that produced the war is not fully detailed in the games, but its consequences are embodied in the ultimate weapons history. AZ, the king who built it, constructed the weapon to bring back a Pokémon he loved. The weapon worked. The Pokémon was resurrected. The cost was the absorption of the life energy of an enormous number of Pokémon drawn into the weapon's mechanism to power its transformation. AZ's Floette, the Pokémon he had loved and had brought back, learned what was done to make its resurrection possible and left him. The relationship that had been the reason for everything was destroyed by the means used to restore it. AZ then fired the weapon again, this time not to resurrect, but to end the war. The weapon was effective in this use as well. The war ended, so Azez survived, somehow sustained by the weapon's energy still moving through him, and has been moving through the world ever since in a state that cannot really be called living in any complete sense. He has been walking for 3,000 years. He appears in the game as a very tall, ancient man who seems disconnected from the world around him, moving through it without being part of it. The player encounters him at various points, and the game gradually communicates what he is. At the end of the game, after the ultimate weapon crisis is resolved and the player has spoken to him enough, his Floette returns. It has been apparently alive and away for 3,000 years, and now it comes back. The reunion is presented simply, without drama. Two beings who have not been together for an incomprehensible span of time being together again. The game does not tell you what happens after. It does not need to. The simplicity of the image carries everything the game wants to say about time, loss, and what it looks like when waiting is finally over. Team Flare's use of the ultimate weapon is entirely without the grief that built it. Lysandra is not trying to restore something he lost. He is making a policy decision. He has determined that the world would be better with most of its population removed, and he has found a tool capable of removing them. The gap between AZ's original use of the weapon, built from love and grief, and the specific terrible logic of a person who could not accept a particular death, and Lysandra's planned use, built from cold calculation about optimal population density, is the moral distance between a tragedy and a crime. AZ was not right. What he did was catastrophic, but it was human in a way that Lysandra's plan is not. Lysandra has reasoned his way out of the humanity that might have stopped him. The gym leaders of Kalos, who appear in X and Y as the usual series of obstacles between the player character and the Elite Four, includes several who have ties to Team Flare that the game does not fully explain but implies. The organization has been present in Kalos long enough to have infiltrated or influenced multiple aspects of the region's structure. This is consistent with Lysandra's public position. He has the resources, the connections, and the credibility to build something with significant reach. Team Flare is not a gang that crept in from outside the region's legitimate structures. It grew inside them, funded by a man who was already part of those structures, organized around a vision that its members believed was, in some form, the right thing to do. The players of X and Y who paid attention to Lysandra's early appearances in the game before his role as Team Flare's leader is revealed have an experience that the games rarely offer: the chance to watch a villain talk before you know they are one. He discusses the world in terms that sound, at first, like the concerns of someone who cares deeply about its future. He is not performing. The concerns are real. What he has concluded from them is the problem, and by the time you understand what he has concluded, you have already spent time in conversation with someone who is always intending to kill most of the people around you. The Alola region organizes its culture around the Island Challenge, a tradition that asks young trainers to travel across 4 islands, completing trials that test their connection with Pokémon and their willingness to confront things that are difficult. The totem Pokémon who appear in these trials are significantly powered up versions of species that would normally be approachable. The Island Challenge is not easy. It is designed to be meaningful, which means it is designed to ask something real of the people who attempt it. Team Skull began with what the Island Challenge left behind: the trainers who could not complete it. This is stated in the game's supplementary materials and in conversations with various characters across Alola, but it is also visible in Team Skull itself. The grunts who populate the organization carry themselves with the specific energy of people who have been told by the structure of the society they grew up in that they were not enough. They overcorrect, they posture, they are loud in a way that speaks to the thing underneath the loudness. Their occupation of Po Town, where they have displaced other residents and established their own territory outside the main flow of Alolan society, is the act of people who needed somewhere to belong after the place they were supposed to belong proved inaccessible. Guzma is Team Skull's boss, and his characterization across Sun, Moon, and the Ultra games is one of the more carefully developed villain portraits in the Alola titles. He is, technically, not someone who failed the Island Challenge in the way the grunts did. He was talented enough that his failure, when it came, was more specific and more personal. He wanted to become an Island Kahuna. The Kahuna position, held by a trainer chosen by the legendary guardian of each island, is the highest recognition the Island Challenge structure offers. Guzma sought that recognition and was not chosen. The guardian of Melamale Island, the legendary Tapu Koko, did not select him. Whatever the criteria by which a Tapu makes this choice, Guzma did not meet them. What happened to Guzma after this rejection is told partly in Alola and partly in the homes and environments you move through over the course of the game. His relationship with his parents is something the game shows without much explicit commentary. His mother offers observations about him that communicate the specific texture of what went wrong without requiring dramatic exposition. His father communicates something worse, and the person who was his mentor, who might have shaped his talent into something that could have found expression within the Island Challenge's structure, was the professor and eventual Professor Kukui, who did not stay in that mentoring role with Guzma in the way that Guzma apparently needed. Team Skull is, consequently, something built from the specific shape of Guzma's wound. It is an organization of people who did not fit, led by a man who did not fit, occupying space that was always already marginal, performing a version of toughness that is almost entirely about convincing people, including themselves, that they do not care about the things they care about. The shadow aesthetic, the loud walking style, the aggressive posturing, all of it is theater in service of the same underlying reality. These are people who were hurt and built something out of the hurt. The game does not excuse what Team Skull does. They steal Pokémon. They cause real problems for trainers throughout Alola. Plumeria, the second in command, who calls the grunts her numbers in an affectionate inversion of the derogatory label, is genuinely protective of them in a way that says something about her, but that protection is also the protection of an organization that is actively harmful. The sympathy the game invites for Team Skull's origins does not erase the consequences of its operations. Lusamine and the Ether Foundation occupy a different register of threat. Their public mission is conservation and research, and unlike most villain organizations whose public missions are pure fiction, the Ether Foundation actually does what it claims to do in some significant portion of its operations. It takes in injured Pokémon, it studies them, it provides care, the conservation work is real. What it conceals is also real, and the concealment is possible precisely because the conservation work provides genuine cover. You cannot dismiss the Ether Foundation as obviously villainous, because it is not obviously villainous. It does visible good. The harm is buried in the foundation beneath the good work. Lusamine's husband Moan disappeared through an ultra wormhole sometime before the events of Sun and Moon. This is, in the lore, a specific event. A person was consumed by a portal to another dimension while engaged in research. The circumstances suggest it was not intentional. He did not walk through voluntarily. He was taken. And Lusamine, who was apparently in the early stage of building the Ether Foundation at the time, reorganized the entire project of her professional life around finding him. The Ultra Beasts, the creatures from beyond the wormholes that became the Foundation's research focus, are connected to the space where he went. If she can understand the Ultra Beasts, she can understand the wormholes. If she can understand the wormholes, she might find him. This is, as motivations go, entirely human. The loss of someone you love to circumstances that are beyond your control, to an absence rather than a death, to a disappearance that never fully closes because the possibility of return can never be eliminated, is a form of grief that operates differently from ordinary bereavement. It does not have finality. It does not have an ending to move past. It has only the open question, sustained indefinitely, becoming over time not a question, but a mission, not grief, but obsession, not love, but the machinery that love became when it was given nowhere to go. What Lusamine became in the years between Mon's disappearance and the events of the games is someone whose grief converted into something that could not distinguish between loving something and needing to possess it. The Nihilego, the Ultra Beast she is most drawn to, is a creature described in the game's lore as injecting neurotoxins that cause humans to act on their deepest drives without inhibition or rational check. Lusamine's deep drive is to have the things she loves near her and never lose them. The toxin does not create this drive, it removes the brakes on it. The Lusamine who fuses with Nihilego is not fundamentally different from the Lusamine who was running the Ether Foundation before that moment. She is just more visible. Lily and Gladion are the two people who most clearly understand who Lusamine is, because they grew up inside the experience of being loved by her. Lily's role in Sun and Moon is the most carefully developed character arc in the Alola games. She begins as someone whose relationship to Pokémon is complicated by fear, whose relationship to herself is complicated by the requirement of being who her mother needed her to be, whose presence in the story is explained before its source is understood. She develops over the course of the game into someone who has found a basis for her own strength, who has made choices about who she is that are not determined by what Lusamine wanted from her. The game treats this development with more patience and attention than it treats most character arcs, which is appropriate. It is doing something harder than developing a trainer's battling skill. It is showing a person becoming someone. Gladion is a different kind of response to the same source. Where Lily was trying to become good enough, Gladion ran and has been using the running as the basis for the strength he builds. His relationship with his Pokémon, particularly with Type Null, the artificial legendary creature he effectively rescued from the Foundation's research lab, is one of the game's quieter portraits of the bond the series is always arguing for. He and Null found each other in the circumstances of their mutual captivity and their mutual need to get out of it. The bond between them is not built on training toward a competitive goal. It is built on the specific shared experience of not being free and then of being free together. The resolution of the Ether Foundation arc, in which Lusamine is defeated and separated from Nihilego, does not resolve the thing that made her what she became. She survives. She remains someone who lost her husband to an ultra wormhole and made of that loss something that consumed her family and threatened her region. The Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon versions of Lusamine offer more closure on her character, including a version in which Mon is found, but even in that version, the years of damage are not undone. They are simply followed by the beginning of something different. The games treat this, correctly, as the beginning of a very long process rather than a resolution. Rainbow Rocket, which appears in the post-game content of Pokémon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon under the title Episode RR, is structured as a greatest hits summary of the main series villain tradition, but the framing device it uses changes what the summary means. Every villain leader gathered in the Ether Foundation headquarters, now renamed Team Rainbow Rocket's castle, has been drawn from a timeline where they won. They are not the versions of themselves who were stopped by a young trainer. They are the versions that succeeded. Giovanni used the Master Ball to catch Mewtwo and extended the Team Rocket's reach to legendary power. Maxie activated Groudon and expanded the land. Archie activated Kyogre and flooded the region. Cyrus remade the universe without Spirit. Ghetsis convinced Unova to release its Pokémon and took control. Lysandre fired the ultimate weapon and began his cold world. The narrative logic of the episode asks the player to think about what that means. Not just that these leaders are powerful, but that the versions of them present in Rainbow Rocket are people for whom their vision worked. They achieved what they were trying to achieve. And the question the episode implicitly poses is whether achieving it changed them. The answer is no. Success has not made any of them different. Giovanni is still organized and precise and interested in acquisition. Maxie is still cerebral and controlled. Archie is still passionate and convinced. Cyrus is still walking the same internal logic toward the same conclusions. Ghetsis is still using other people as instruments. Lysandra is still presenting aestheticized explanations for mass death. Their victories confirmed them. They did not transform them. The confrontations with each leader in the episode are structured as capsule summaries of their respective philosophical positions. You move through the castle floor by floor, each floor occupied by a leader in their element. Archie talks about the sea, Maxie talks about the land, Cyrus talks about the elimination of spirit in terms that are quieter and more absolute than anything he said in the original games. Ghetsis uses language about NN that reveals, even now, even after his plans succeeded in some timeline, the specific contempt with which he holds everyone around him. Lysandra talks about beauty and what deserves to survive, and the game frames this as monstrous while also maintaining that Lysandra himself believes it completely. Giovanni at the summit is a different kind of confrontation than any of the others. He is not there to deliver a philosophical monologue. He is there because he came from a timeline where he succeeded, assessed the situation in the present timeline, and decided to pursue what he came here for with the same methodical precision he always had. He has a Mewtwo. He has an organization. He has experience. The fact that this is not his home timeline is not particularly interesting to him. The opportunity is interesting to him. The defeat of Rainbow Rocket does not resolve anything about the timelines they came from. That is the uncomfortable background logic the episode establishes and does not resolve, because it cannot. The alternate histories where these plans succeeded are still out there, implied by the ultra wormhole technology that made this gathering possible. The player has defeated these particular versions of these particular leaders in this particular present. Elsewhere, in the implied space of the multiverse, the Pokemon series began gesturing toward, with the Hoopa lore and the ultra wormhole mechanics, other outcomes exist and are not changed by this. The Galar region's primary villain, Chairman Rose, is the Pokemon series' attempt to characterize something specific about a certain kind of contemporary leadership. The visionary whose vision is so certain and so complete that it cannot accommodate the people who would be affected by it being wrong. Rose runs Macrocosmos, the conglomerate that controls most of Galar's infrastructure, and he is not a bad man in the way that Ghetsis is a bad man. He does not want people to suffer. He wants people to thrive, specifically in a version of the future where the energy crisis he has identified does not destroy the civilization he has spent his career building. The energy crisis is real in the game's terms, or at least Rose believes it is real, which for the purposes of his decision-making amounts to the same thing. The Dynamax energy that powers Galar's civilization, the energy that is also the source of the Dynamax phenomenon that defines the region's Pokemon battles and culture, is described as finite. The currents beneath Galar that produce it will eventually run out. Rose has calculated when, and he has decided that the only way to address this is to access an unlimited supply of Dynamax energy, which is located in Eternatus, the alien Pokemon that arrived on a meteor thousands of years ago and whose energy is, by its nature, effectively inexhaustible. The problem is that Eternatus, in its full form, triggers the Darkest Day, the catastrophic event described in Galar's ancient legends, in which Pokemon were gigantamaxed beyond control, and enormous things moved through the world, breaking everything in their paths. The Darkest Day was ended, according to legend, by the intervention of Zacian and Zamazinta, the legendary wolves of Galar, and has not recurred because Eternatus has remained in a dormant state for the intervening centuries. Rose's plan to use Eternatus's energy necessarily involves waking it up, which necessarily involves the risk of what happened before happening again. Rose knows this. He knows what the Darkest Day was. He has decided that the risk is acceptable given the alternative, and he executes his plan in the middle of the Galar Championship Finals, surrounded by spectators and cameras, sending a message to the champion Dandel Ion and the arriving challenger that there is about to be an apocalyptic event, and asking for their help after the fact. This decision, to trigger a disaster and then ask the people best positioned to address it, to please address it, is the specific shape of Rose's failure. He is not trying to cause harm. He believes he is preventing much greater harm. But the gap between his analysis of the situation and the actual situation, in terms of what he is willing to impose on the world for the sake of his certainty, is exactly the gap that defines every Pokemon villain. He has decided that his understanding is complete enough to justify acting without consent. Team Yell is structurally the simplest villain team in the series, and this simplicity is intentional. They are not trying to reshape the world. They are not pursuing legendary Pokemon for instruments of power. They are fans of a trainer named Marnie, and their support of her, which is genuine and comes from a real sense of community investment in someone from their town, has curdled into something that actively harms the other participants in the championship challenge. They block roads, they harass competitors, they interfere with the conditions needed for fair competition. They do these things because they believe it will improve Marnie's chances, which is both a misconception and an expression of love taken past the point where it can recognize its own damage. Marnie herself, it should be said, does not want any of this. She is competing honestly because she is someone who takes the competition seriously and whose integrity matters to her. Team Yell's interference is not help. It is a form of control, the imposition of their vision of what her success should look like onto a person who is perfectly capable of pursuing her own. The game uses this to make a specific small point. You can love someone and be harmful to them. The love does not make the harm not harm. Marnie's story in Sword and Shield, which ends with her eventually becoming the gym leader of Spikemuth, is partly the story of a person navigating what it means to have your success be something other people feel entitled to determine the shape of. Team Star is the most recent of the main series' villainous organizations, and the most carefully constructed in terms of what it is asking the player to do with their preconceptions. You are told, before you have any real context, that Team Star is a group of delinquents causing trouble. You are asked to dismantle them. You are sent by Cassiopeia, an anonymous contact, to defeat their squads one by one and break up their operation. This framing, which is familiar from every previous villainous team narrative in the series, is the setup for a sustained reversal. Team Star was not built by bullies. It was built by people who were bullied. 5 students at the Naranja or Uva Academy were subjected to sustained harassment from a group of classmates. The bullying was severe enough that they stopped attending school to avoid it. Other students who had experienced similar treatment found out and joined them, forming a coalition of the displaced outside the academy's bounds, existing in camps around the Paldea region. When the bullying group was eventually expelled, the academy administration, in a decision the game does not excuse, extended the consequences to Team Star as well, effectively punishing the response rather than the cause. Each of Team Star's 5 bosses carries a specific story about what they brought to the group. Giacomo, the boss of the Dark Crew, developed his music production artistry within Team Star's community, finding in the group a context where creative work was possible. Mela, the boss of the Fire Crew, is someone whose anger is a form of care, someone who protected the people around her, because protection was what she needed, and no one else was providing it. Atticus, the boss of the Poison Crew, is a designer who found in Team Star a space to develop an aesthetic identity that the school's social environment had not provided. Ortega, the boss of the Fairy Crew, is a wealthy young person who chose to use his privilege not to insulate himself from difficulty, but to be part of something that needed resources, a choice that says something quietly significant. And Airy, the boss of the Fighting Crew, is the most affecting of the 5, a trainer of exceptional skill who has built her identity around protecting others, because she understood early that her ability to fight was something she could put in service of people who could not fight for themselves. Penny, who is both Cassiopeia and the player's close friend throughout the game, founded Team Star and then left it, consumed by guilt about the turn her creation's reputation had taken. She organized its dismantlement from the outside, using the Academy's competition structure to send a player character she trusted into each confrontation. The reveal of Penny as Cassiopeia is constructed carefully, delayed long enough that the player has had time to care about both versions of her separately, and then experiences the merge as a confirmation of something they perhaps already suspected but had not been able to confirm. Director Clavel's role in the Team Star resolution is the most direct institutional reckoning the Pokémon series has ever attempted. He is the person who should have addressed the bullying when it was happening. He did not. Whether this was oversight, institutional inertia, or something more culpable, the consequences arrived regardless of the cause. He stood in front of students who had been failed by the environment he was responsible for, and then extended the failures by punishing them for their response. The game yet does not let him resolve this through a single dramatic gesture of apology. It requires him to actually do something, to show up for the students he failed, to fight alongside them in a way that acknowledges what was owed rather than what is comfortable. The music of Team Star's confrontations deserves acknowledgement. Each crew boss battle is accompanied by an original track that reflects the character of the boss fighting you. These tracks are, by the consensus of most players who engaged with Scarlet and Violet's soundtrack, among the best music in the series. This is arguably the game's way of communicating what Team Star is, despite how it appears. Something with this much artistry in it, something built with this much care for what each member means to the others, is not what you were told it was when you arrived to dismantle it. There is a pattern that runs through every organization the Pokemon world has produced under the name of villainy, and it becomes visible only when you have sat with enough of them and allowed the individual details to settle into something broader. The pattern is this: every villainous team represents a genuine observation about the world's difficulty, and every villainous team's failure is located in what they chose to do with that observation. Giovanni observed that the world contained power structures built on the control of resources, and that Pokemon were among the most valuable resources in his world. He was not wrong. The world of Kanto is built on exactly the kind of power structures he identified. His failure was in concluding that the right response to existing within an exploitative system was to become its most efficient practitioner. Maxie observed that human civilization requires land and physical resources to sustain itself, and that the balance of land and ocean in Hoenn constrained what civilization could build. He was not wrong about the relationship between geography and civilization. His failure was in concluding that a legendary creature could be used as a precision instrument for reshaping that geography at civilizational scale. Archie observed that human civilization had damaged and was continuing to damage the natural environments that sustained life before there were cities to sustain. He was not wrong about the trajectory of environmental damage. His failure was in concluding that flooding everything was the solution to people taking too much. Cyrus observed that desire, attachment, and the capacity for grief were the sources of suffering in a world organized around getting and losing things. He was not wrong that suffering exists and that it is connected to wanting. His failure was in concluding that the solution to suffering was the elimination of the capacity for it, including from the universe that contained it. Anne observed that the relationship between people and Pokemon, as it was commonly practiced, contained real possibilities for exploitation. He was not wrong that captured Pokemon do not consent to captivity in any ordinary sense. His failure, or rather Ghetsis' failure through him, was in concluding that liberation was served by an organization whose actual goal was monopoly. Lysandra observed that consumption exceeded available resources and that the gap was growing. He was not wrong about the relationship between population and resources. His failure was in concluding that the right response to that gap was to reduce the population. Each of these observations, held individually, is the kind of thing that a serious person looking honestly at the Pokemon world, or the real world, can recognize as having some basis. The series does not ask you to dismiss what these people saw. It asks you to think about what they chose to do with it. And what they chose, in every case, was to acquire control over something that resisted control, to direct power at a problem that was not amenable to that kind of direction. The legendary creatures they pursued are, in the lore, beings of genuine autonomy. They did not ask to be instruments. The people who pursued them assumed that sufficient power or sufficient cleverness could make the assumption workable, It never could. The player characters who oppose these organizations operate from a fundamentally different orientation. They do not pursue legendary Pokemon for what those creatures can do for them. They encounter legendary Pokemon because the story puts them in the same place at the same time, and the legendaries repeatedly in game after game make a choice. They do not make that choice because the player characters are philosophically correct. They make it because the player characters arrived without assuming they had a right to what they were encountering. They were open. They were not already full of their own plans. This is the quiet argument the series has been making, with more patience and more consistency than is usually noticed. Not that power is bad, not that ambition is wrong, not that the things the villains observed about the world were false, but that the disposition from which you approach power, the question of whether you encounter what is in front of you or whether you use what is in front of you, determines more than any particular amount of capability or intelligence or vision can compensate for. The legendary Pokemon at the center of each crisis are not choosing the player character as their champion because the player is the strongest trainer. They are, in some cases, clearly not. Cyrus has more trained Pokemon than almost any player team. Lysandre has resources the player cannot match. Team Plasma's castle is full of people who have been training with single-minded purpose. The legendaries choose the player because the player is doing something none of the villains are doing. They are there, in the specific place, with the specific Pokemon they care about, without a plan for what to do with whatever they find. That absence of agenda, that openness, is the actual criterion for legendary trust, as the games construct it. This is not a naive argument. The series does not suggest that good intentions are enough, or that caring about things makes you effective. The player characters fail battles. They have to try again. They carry scars in the form of whited out teams and restart points. They grow because of the failures, not despite them, because the failures do not make them close up and become certain and strategic. They encounter the next thing still open. The villains, with very few exceptions, become certain somewhere along the way. Giovanni became certain that acquisition was the answer. Cyrus became certain that spirit was the problem. Lysandra became certain that beauty was the criterion. Getsus was never uncertain about anything. The certainty is part of the organization building capacity. You cannot recruit people to a vague intention. You need a mission, and a mission requires enough certainty to state it. But the certainty, once established, tends to grow. It tends to fill the spaces where doubt could have lived. It tends to become, eventually, the thing that prevents the person holding it from being changed by what they encounter. The player characters change across every game. This is, mechanically, the point. The Pokemon grow stronger, the trainer's collection expands, the relationships deepen, the world reveals more of itself. The games are structured as accumulation, as an opening, as the gradual discovery of more of what exists. The villains are structured as the opposite. They have their mission, their target, their theory of change, and everything else in the world is organized in relation to that structure. The world for them is already known. The question is only execution. This is why the legendary creatures cannot be controlled by them, even when the villains succeed in capturing or summoning them. Gruden does not have a policy agenda. Dialga does not care about Cyrus's theory of spirit. Eternatus does not have an energy provision plan. These creatures are not organized around human concerns. They are themselves operating at scales that predate and will outlast any human project. The attempt to control them is not just ethically wrong in the game's terms. It is practically wrong in the deepest sense. It misunderstands what they are. And the misunderstanding is the direct result of the certainty that has already organized everything else in the villain's worldview. The player characters, who have not organized everything yet, who are still accumulating the world rather than administering it, can encounter what is actually there. That capacity for genuine encounter is, in the end, what the series has been arguing constitutes power, not the kind that can be stolen or transferred or built up in a laboratory, the kind that happens when one being is actually present to another, without agenda, without prior determination about what the other should be or provide. That presence is rare. It is what the series rewards, and it is, perhaps quietly, what makes the long journey through the Pokemon world, through all its regions, and all its landmarks, and all its slowly accumulating evidence of what care can produce, feel like something more than a game. These histories, these organizations and leaders, and their varied and specific failures, are the darker background against which that argument is made. They are necessary to it. A story about what openness can do only makes sense if there are things that closeness produces. Team Rocket's acquisitiveness, Team Galactic's certainty, Team Plasma's instrumentalization of genuine ideals, all of these are the things that the player characters and their Pokemon are not. And the series has always known that the not is as important as the is. That you understand something better by seeing what it is being held against. The organizational structure of Team Rocket, examined carefully, reveals something that most criminal enterprises in fiction do not possess: a genuine hierarchy of competence. Giovanni did not surround himself with loyalists who shared his vision. He surrounded himself with people who were good at doing what he needed done. The grunts, who appear in Kanto's dungeons and facilities, are there because they were recruited for their capacity, however limited, to follow orders and operate equipment and guard things. The scientists who worked in the Cinnabar Mansion, who produced Mewtwo, and who processed the genetic material of Mew through a cloning process that the research notes describe with the antiseptic language of serious laboratory work, were there because they were capable of doing what Giovanni commissioned. This is why Team Rocket lasted as long as it did, and why its collapse was so complete once Giovanni left. The organization was competent because it had been built around competence, but competence in service of a single person's vision is not institutional resilience. It is machinery that works only when the operator is present. When Giovanni disappeared, the grunts knew how to do their jobs. They did not know what the jobs were for anymore. The operational capacity remained. The direction evaporated, and what you have left in the Johto remnants is the strange sight of a well-functioning machine running in the absence of a goal, generating the radio broadcast that is, in retrospect, one of the more human moments in the villain tradition of the series. They want their father back. He was terrible in ways that the games do not fully enumerate but clearly imply, and they want him back anyway. Silver, the rival character of Gold and Silver, who is eventually revealed to be Giovanni's son, provides a counterpoint that the games never fully articulate but make available. Silver hates Team Rocket. He hates them with a specific personal anger that goes beyond the usual rival's contempt for weakness. He has experienced what it looks like to be close to what Giovanni built, and his response was not to join it, but to define himself in opposition to it. He is harsh with his Pokémon in ways that echo the Rocket philosophy of treating them as instruments, and the game tracks his relationship with his Pokémon as a character development arc. He begins the way someone raised in proximity to Giovanni's organization would begin. He does not end that way. The question of whether Silver eventually made contact with his father, whether Giovanni knew he had a son waiting in Johto who hated everything he stood for and was growing stronger every day, is left open in the games in a way that is probably intentional. The Johto games are interested in what it looks like to grow up in the shadow of something, to carry the shape of someone else's influence without endorsing it. Silver is the most direct examination of this in the villain tradition. He is what Team Rocket produced when it produced a child, and what it produced was someone who decided, through what the game frames as a genuine arc of development, that the way he had learned to be was not the way he wanted to be. This is, in the Pokemon series terms, a significant act. The magma and aqua admins, returned to for the final time, include figures that the games treat with enough specificity to be worth dwelling on. Tabitha, Maxie's most prominent admin in Omega Ruby, has a relationship with his leader that the expanded game presents as something close to genuine admiration. He follows Maxie not just because Maxie leads the organization, but because he believes in what Maxie is trying to do. This is important for understanding what the organizations are composed of. Grunts may simply want to belong somewhere. Admins, by the time they reach administrative positions, have usually arrived there through some degree of active commitment. Tabitha is not a person who drifted into Team Magma. He made a choice. Matt, on the Aqua side, is different in a way that mirrors the organizational difference between the two teams. He is enthusiastic, physically, loudly, in a way that reflects the Team Aqua energy of passionate conviction over intellectual precision. He loves what Team Aqua is about, but what he loves is the activity, the sense of mission, the feeling of being part of something larger. In the expanded remakes, when the mission collapses and Archie is forced to reckon with what he did, Matt is there, still present, not entirely sure what to do with the absence of the certainty that had sustained him. He is, in this, the most human of the admins on either side. He is someone whose identity was organized around the mission and who now has to discover what identity looks like without it. The caves and dungeons of the Huen region carry the traces of Team Magma and Team Aqua's operations in ways that the surface world does not. The seafloor cavern, where Kyogre slept in its dormancy, and where Team Aqua made its final push to awaken it, is one of the most atmospherically achieved locations in the Huen games. You have to surf significant distances to reach it, dive under the ocean to find its entrance, move through cave systems that have not been mapped by the main culture of the region. It is genuinely remote. The effort required to reach it is part of what the game communicates about how far Team Aqua was willing to go. They went to the bottom of the ocean to find what they needed. The commitment was real. The plan was not. The Terra Cave and Marine Cave, locations that appear in the post-game of the original Ruby and Sapphire, are sites where the lingering energy of Groudon and Kyogre manifests in the environment. They shift location, appearing in different routes on different days, accessible only to players who know to check the television broadcasts that announce where the weather anomalies are. These locations are, in their quiet way, the game's postscript to the Magmus and Aqua conflict. The legendary creatures were awakened and then calmed again, but the calming did not restore the original equilibrium perfectly. Something changed. The caves are where that change is visible, in the form of environments where Groudon or Kyogre can be encountered again, in smaller encounters that are nonetheless charged with the residual energy of what happened. Cyrus, in the distortion world, makes his decision without theatrical explanation. The game gives him a few lines of dialogue, and then he is gone. The restraint of this ending is characteristic of the best Pokémon villain closures. They do not need the villain to deliver a final speech explaining what they learned or what they are. They let the decision be the statement. Cyrus decides he would rather remain in the distortion world than return to the universe with Spirit still in it. This is, in the game's logic, exactly consistent with everything he said and did throughout the story. He has not been changed by defeat. He has not had a revelation. He has simply found a space that is closer to what he wanted, however far it falls short, and decided to inhabit it. Giratina's presence in the distortion world as the implicit host of this offer is interesting. Giratina was banished by Arceus for violence in a time before human civilization, according to Sinnoh's mythology. It has existed in the distortion world, which is described as the world of antimatter that exists in balance with the world of matter, for as long as the two worlds have existed It is not malevolent in the straightforward way. It is simply enormous and old, and removed from the concerns that animate ordinary Pokemon and human interaction. Offering Cyrus the distortion world to rule is either a cruel irony or a genuine gift, depending on what Giratina understands about Cyrus. The game does not tell you which. The Lake Guardians, after the events of Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, return to their lakes. The damage done to Lake Valor is not immediately restored. The game does not pretend that what Team Galactic did to the lakes can be simply undone by the villain's defeat. The ecology of the lakes was disrupted. Pokemon died. The restoration, to whatever extent it occurs, happens off screen in the implied future of the Sinnoh region that the games do not show. This is, in a quiet way, an honest approach to depicting the consequences of what villainous organizations do. The immediate crisis ends, the longer term damage lingers. In's journey after Black and White is perhaps the most interesting all ongoing story in the main series villain tradition, precisely because it is not a story about a villain. He was never fully a villain. He was a person with a genuine philosophy who was used as an instrument by someone who did not share that philosophy. After Black and White, after the confrontation where his legendary Pokemon chooses the player character and Ghetsis' plan collapses, In is free in a way he has never been before. He does not have an organization. He does not have a mission that someone else designed. He has the question he has always been asking, and he has the openness to pursue it honestly. In Black and White 2, he is traveling. He appears at different points with his legendary Pokemon, and the conversations with him suggest someone who is engaging with the world on his own terms rather than through the lens of the Liberation Project. He is still asking what it means for a Pokemon to be free, but he is asking it through encounter rather than argument. He is living alongside his Pokemon in a way that the game does not describe fully, but that feels, in the texture of his brief appearances, genuinely exploratory. He is learning something. He does not know what yet. The question of whether N ultimately finds an answer to the question he has been asking is left open, which is appropriate. The question of whether any relationship between a person and a Pokemon can be truly consensual or truly free is not a question the games resolve. They argue, through the player character's experience, that the bonds formed in the course of the game are real and meaningful, but they do not resolve the philosophical question N poses about the foundations of that relationship. They hold both the reality of the bond as experienced and the complexity of its context. N is still asking. The series is still not fully answering. That ongoing openness is part of what makes the question valuable. Kalos, between the events of X and Y and the events of the present game, has been shaped by the almost firing of the ultimate weapon in ways the game only partially explores. The existence of an AZ who has been walking the region for 3,000 years, who is known to the people of Lumiose City as an eccentric, very tall man who has been moving through Kalos' history in the background of everything, is a detail the game introduces and then does not fully develop. How many people knew what he was? How many generations of Kalos residents passed AZ on the road, wondered about him, perhaps never made the connection? He has been there through all of it, carrying what he did, carrying the knowledge of what the weapon can do, watching the region rebuild itself over centuries, and never quite being part of the rebuilding. The monuments that exist in Kalos commemorating the war and its ending, the Chamber of Emptiness, the story fragments preserved in various NPCs' memories of old tales, all of these are traces of an event that most people in the present game know as history. AZ knows it as personal experience. The gap between historical knowledge and lived memory is part of what his presence communicates. The war happened. The ultimate weapon was built. Something was lost that mattered in ways the story of the war does not capture. AZ carries the specificity of what was lost in a way that historical record cannot, and he carries it alone for 3,000 years until Lysandra tries to fire the weapon again, and the player character prevents it, and the Pokemon that left 3,000 years ago comes back. The Ether Foundation's research into Ultra Beasts, in retrospect, was always going to produce the crisis it produced. Lucamine's obsession with the ultra wormholes was the organizing principle of the Foundation's research agenda, and the entire institutional structure was oriented toward finding what was on the other side of those wormholes. The scientists who worked there, including Wicke and Faba, and the teams they led, were working on a project whose endpoint was not conservation. The conservation was real, but it was also cover for Lucamine and perhaps for some of the scientists who preferred not to fully examine what they were working toward. Faba, the branch chief of the Ether Foundation, is perhaps the most interesting supporting villain in the Alola games. He is not ideologically committed to anything except his own position and reputation. He makes decisions throughout Sun and Moon that are primarily motivated by the desire to protect his standing, which means he is willing to do significant harm to avoid any admission that he was wrong. He erases Lily and Gladion from his memory because acknowledging their significance would require acknowledging his own complicity in Lucamine's project. He is, in the villain tradition, the most recognizably bureaucratic figure, someone who has built a career on the assumption that he will always be able to define the terms by which his actions are evaluated. The Ultra Beasts themselves are worth acknowledging as characters in the Alola lore, rather than simply as the objects of Team Ether's research. They are beings from another dimension who did not ask to be in Alola. When they arrive, they behave according to their own natures, which are not violent in any intentional sense, but are dangerous, because they are operating according to logic that Alola's environment did not develop alongside. Nihiligue's toxin injection is not malice. It is the expression of something that evolved in a context where beings like Nihiligo and beings like Lucamine presumably do not interact. The harm it causes in Alola is a category error on both sides of the encounter. Not a war, but a profound mismatch between beings who were never meant to be in proximity. The Ultra Guardians, the group formed in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon to address Ultra Beast incursions, represents the same logic in reverse. Rather than pursuing the Ultra Beasts for their power or their threat potential, the Ultra Guardians are trying to return them to their home dimension. The approach is the conservationist approach, the one the Ether Foundation was supposed to be taking. You encounter a creature in a context that is not its own. You try to understand what it is, and then you try to help it be where it should be, rather than exploiting its displacement. This is, quietly, the Alola game's answer to the Lucamine arc. The Foundation was built on the premise of caring for displaced creatures, and that premise was sound. The person running it had stopped being able to distinguish between caring for something and possessing it. Rose's failure in Sword and Shield to return to it once more with the additional context of everything the series had established before it is a specific kind of hubris that the Pokémon series had not quite addressed before. Previous villains had philosophical certainties. Rose has procedural certainty. He has done the analysis. He has identified the problem. He has determined the solution. He has built toward it through his career, slowly, methodically, positioning himself to be in the place and with the resources to execute when he determined the time was right. The problem is not his competence. He is genuinely competent. The problem is that his analysis was conducted in isolation from the people who would bear the consequences of being wrong, and that isolation from accountability is what allows the certainty to grow unchecked until it is willing to impose a catastrophe on everyone around it in the interest of averting a worse one. The championship finals that Rose interrupts are a useful frame for this. The Galar Championship is the cultural centerpiece of the region, the event around which significant amounts of social energy and identity are organized. It is not just a sporting event, it is how Galar as a culture expresses what it values. Rose's decision to trigger the darkest day in the middle of this event is, from one angle, purely pragmatic. The champion is there. The person most capable of addressing the crisis is present. This is the most efficient moment. From another angle, it is the most precise possible expression of what was wrong with his approach all along. He interrupted the thing the culture was gathered around to experience together without asking anyone, because his analysis determined it was time. The analysis was about the energy crisis. The cultural harm of the act was not in the model. Eternatus itself is an interesting presence in the sword and shield mythology. It arrived on a meteor approximately 20,000 years ago, which means it has been in Galar for an enormous amount of time, without being the focus of catastrophe continuously. The Darkest Day was a specific event, apparently triggered by something about the state of Eternatus at that time or the circumstances of its activity. For most of the preceding and subsequent time, it existed beneath the earth, providing the Dynamax energy that became integral to Galarian culture and civilization, and the civilization built itself around a resource it did not fully understand the source or the nature of. Rose's plan to extract that resource deliberately rather than simply benefit from its passive presence was not, in itself, absurd. The absurdity was in the execution, choosing to do it at maximum publicity and minimum preparation, trusting that the people who would have to deal with the consequences could be asked for help after the fact rather than consulted before. The post-game content of Sword and Shield includes an encounter with the legendary dogs Zacian and Zamazenta at the Slumbering Weald, the location where the player character found the rusted sword and rusted shield at the beginning of the game. The rusted weapons belong to the legendary dogs, and restoring them completes the cycle of the ancient legend. The dogs who stopped the Darkest Day long ago are remembered, restored, and allowed to rest again. The image of legendary creatures returning to sleep because the crisis has passed, because what they were needed for has been addressed, is a recurrent one in the Pokémon series. It says something about the nature of the legendary creatures that they do not seek to remain active, to remain part of the ongoing world. They exist to answer specific needs, and then, when those needs are met, they rest. The human organizations that pursue them are pursuing something that does not want to be caught, does not want to be used, does not want anything except to be left to the rhythms it has always had. This is perhaps the deepest incompatibility between the villain organizations and the legendary creatures they pursue. The villains need the legendaries to serve their purposes continuously, to remain active and directed in providing power or transformation or destruction on demand. The legendaries are not built for continuous service. They are built for specific moments. Giovanni wants a legendary at his command. Groudon and Kyogre return to the earth when they are calmed. Dialga and Palkia return to their respective domains when the red chain is broken. The tool does not want to be a tool, and no amount of planning or technological development or philosophical conviction changes what the legendary creatures fundamentally are. The children who encounter them and are chosen are also not keeping them. This is rarely noted, but worth noting. The legendaries that appear in the games that can be captured by the player character do not become permanent possessions in the story's terms. The game allows you to carry them in your party, but the narratives treat the legendary encounters as meetings rather than captives. The legendary arrives. Something passes between it and the player character. The legendary stays, but not because it was captured, because it chose to remain. The games are not always perfectly consistent about this distinction, but the best moments in the legendary tradition make it clear. Reshiram and Zekrom do not fight for the player character because they were caught. They fight because they decided to. The history of the Pokemon world's villains is also quietly a history of the regions themselves, because every region's villain organization is shaped by what that region values and how its civilization is organized. Kanto is a region built around the infrastructure of Pokemon training, around gyms and badges, and a clear path to a defined summit. Team Rocket fits this structure precisely. They operate within it, they use it. Giovanni holds a gym badge. The organization exists inside the legitimate structures of the region because the legitimate structures of the region provide the most efficient platform for extraction. You cannot understand what Team Rocket was without understanding what Kanto valued, because they found their niche in the gap between what Kanto said it valued partnership and competition, and the honest pursuit of strength, and what was actually possible within its structures if you were willing to disregard the stated values. Johto is a region with a deeper relationship to its own history than Kanto. The ruins of Alf, the Kimono Girls, the Bell Tower, and Tin Tower, all of these are expressions of a culture that takes its ancient traditions seriously and maintains them through the present. The Johto villains, the remnants of Team Rocket, are distinguished partly by how thoroughly they fail to fit the region they are operating in. They bring Kanto's extraction logic into a region organized around historical continuity and earned relationships, and the mismatch is part of why they feel so defeated even before they are. They are using tools that were designed for a different context, and the context does not yield to them the way Kanto did. Hoenn is a region organized around movement and exploration. Its geography requires it. The ocean routes that connect its islands and cities make every journey an act of navigation. The Pokemon that live in its waters are central to the culture in a way that connects to both Team Magma and Team Aqua's concerns, though neither organization accurately understands the culture they are operating within. Hoenn's people do not simply live beside the ocean, they live in relationship with it. The fishing culture, the surfing culture, the diving culture, all of these are expressions of a civilization that has developed its identity through sustained encounter with water rather than against it. Maxie's plan to expand the land would have destroyed this. Archie's plan to expand the ocean would have replaced it with something that Hoenn's people had no relationship to at that scale. Both leaders failed to understand the region they were trying to help, which is perhaps the most ironic dimension of both their failures. Sinnoh is a region that holds its mythology close to its surface. The creation myths of Sinnoh, involving Arceus and the Lake Guardians, and the formation of time and space and matter and antimatter, are not esoteric knowledge. They are part of the publicly available cultural heritage of the region. The Sinnoh legends are discussed in libraries, in the museums of Eterna City, in the research of Professor Rowan, and the expanded scholarship of various scholars the player encounters. Team Galactic's target, Dialga and Palkia, are known to Sinnoh's people. They are not secret. The organization pursuing them was working in the open, in the sense that the knowledge of what they were pursuing was available to anyone who looked. This is part of what makes the Galactic Crisis so specifically disturbing in a Sinnoh context. It is not that the villains found something hidden. It is that they took something everyone knew was there and treated it as a resource. The creation mythology of Sinnoh, which describes the world as the product of Arceus and its children, was not a set of instructions for how to unmake the world. Cyrus read it as a set of instructions for how to unmake the world. The same texts that the culture preserved as expressions of gratitude and reverence became, in his hands, a technical manual. This is a specific kind of violation, the conversion of sacred into instrumental, and Sinnoh felt it more acutely than another region might because the mythology was so present in the culture's daily life. Unova is a region built on ideals, which is not accidental given the legendary Pokémon Reshiram and Zekrom and what they embody. The tension between truth and ideals, between the reality of the world and the vision of what it could be is woven into the culture of Unova in ways that make Team Plasma's philosophical argument particularly resonant for its people. In was asking questions that the culture was already organized around thinking about. His argument about Pokemon liberation landed in a region where the relationship between ideals and reality was already a live question, where the history of the region involving the legendary dragons and the split between truth seekers and ideal seekers made his questions feel like part of an ongoing conversation rather than an external provocation. Getsis's genius, if it can be called that, was in recognizing this and using it. He found the place where Unova's culture was most open to questioning and planted a question designed to destabilize it. The liberation argument was not chosen randomly. It was chosen because it would resonate specifically with the people of a region already organized around the tension between how things are and how they should be. Getsis read Unova accurately, in the way that predators read landscapes, identifying where the gaps were and positioning himself to exploit them. Kalos is a region shaped by the memory of a war and by the art and beauty that culture produces in response to historical catastrophe. The way that Kalos' cities are built, the way Lumios is organized around culture and education and the pursuit of excellence in multiple dimensions, reflects a civilization that has decided at some historical point that beauty and craft and the things humans can make are the proper response to violence and destruction. The Team Flare aesthetic is, in this context, a precise inversion of the Kalos ethos. They use beauty as a criterion for survival rather than a reason to survive. They have taken the Kalos value of beauty and made it a weapon of exclusion. This is not a coincidence. Lysandra was a person formed by the Kalos culture, and what he built was a dark mirror of what that culture was. Alola is a region that holds the relationship between people and Pokémon in a specifically reciprocal form. The Island Kahuna system, the Island Challenge, the concept of the Tapu as guardians of specific islands rather than abstract legendary creatures, all of these expressions of Alolan culture suggest a civilization that has developed its relationship with Pokemon through something more like negotiation than capture. The Tapus are not owned by anyone. They guard their islands and occasionally intervene in human affairs, but on their own terms. The guardians of the ultraspace, the beings that Lusamine was pursuing, are similarly autonomous. They do not yield to human desire. Team Skull's failure to complete the Island Challenge is a failure to fit into this specific cultural model. The Island Challenge asks for a particular kind of relationship with Pokemon, one that is about encounter and growth rather than domination. The trainers who fail it, you who compose Team Skull, are not necessarily worse trainers in any absolute sense. They are trainers who could not develop the specific quality of relationship that the Alolan model values. And Lusamine, who runs the most prestigious research institution in Alola, has also failed this, in a way that her public position completely obscures. She can no longer encounter. She can only possess. The Galar region is built around a competition that is also, in its cultural function, a celebration of a specific kind of bond. The Dynamax phenomenon, which allows Pokemon to grow enormously during stadium battles, is Galar's most distinctive feature, and the championship system that showcases it is the cultural heart of the region. Rose built his career and his organization on this cultural infrastructure. He understood it in commercial terms. The Pokemon battles are his business. The championship is his event. Eternatus is his energy source. He has commodified the thing that Galar holds most central to its identity, and his inability to see the problem with this is the clearest statement of what he is. Paldea is a region organized around education, which is an unusual structural choice for a Pokemon region. The Academy at the center of the region is not just a setting element, it is the primary institution through which the culture transmits itself, and the conflicts that Team Star arose from are therefore institutional failures. The bullying that produced Team Star was possible because the Academy failed to be what it claimed to be, failed to provide the safe and supportive environment that its educational mission required. Team Star is, in this reading, the evidence that the institution's stated values and its actual operations were not aligned, and the game's resolution requires the institution to close that gap rather than simply defeating the people who exposed it. This regional specificity is one of the more carefully constructed elements of the villain tradition across the series. Each organization fits its region in the way that problems fit the structures that failed to prevent them. They are not random. They grew from specific cracks in specific foundations. Understanding what each organization was requires understanding what each region valued, because the organization was always a response to, or an exploitation of, that value. The trainers who oppose them are also regionally specific in ways that the games make clear. The player character of Kanto is from Pallet Town, which is described as a small town at the edge of wilderness, the furthest thing from the urban infrastructure that Team Rocket inhabits. The player characters of Hoenn are from Little Root Town, described as too small to be on most maps, not yet shaped by the ambitions that are reshaping the region around them. The player character of Sinnoh is from Twinleaf Town, a quiet place whose name suggests the kind of unpretentious, natural detail that Galactic's cosmic ambitions could not see. The player characters of Unova are from Nuvema Town, the smallest town in the region, beginning the journey that will take them to the confrontation with an organization that wanted to unmake the world's most fundamental value. This pattern of the person who will eventually challenge the largest ambitions, starting from the smallest, most ordinary places, is not accidental. It is the series' statement about where the capacity to confront these things actually comes from. Not from institutions, not from resources, not from prior knowledge of the threat, from the accumulation of genuine experience, encounter after encounter, relationship after relationship, in the context of moving through a world that keeps offering the next thing. The small starting towns are small because what grows from them does not need a large foundation. It needs an open one. The Pokémon villain tradition has, across its many iterations, developed a consistent visual language for the organizations it depicts. Team uniforms function as more than identification. They are statements of belonging, of the choice to become part of something larger than individual identity. When Team Rocket's black uniform with its red R appears in Kanto, it reads as menacing in the specific way of organized menace. It is not a person doing bad things. It is a person who has agreed to be part of a system that does bad things. The uniform is the visible acceptance of the system's values. Team Magma's hoods and Team Aqua's bandanas are similarly not accidental choices. The hooded figure carries associations with hidden identity, with devotion, with the willingness to efface individual features in service of a collective. Team Aqua's bandanas, read as more casual, more open to the weather, consistent with an organization that values the outdoor, the natural, the expansive over the institutional. Team Galactic's uniforms are clean and symmetrical and suggest the future rather than the past. Team Plasma's medieval aesthetic in black and white, with its knights and castles and robes, places the organization in a historical frame that feels deliberately archaic, as if they are drawing authority from something older and more established than anything the contemporary world provides. These visual choices are cumulative across the series' history, and players who have followed the games from the beginning carry all of them simultaneously. The new uniform color or design in each game is read against the accumulated memory of every previous one. and the choices are understood in relation to each other. Team Flare's red is Rocket's red intensified, associated now with fashion and elegance rather than menace, but still carrying the inherited connotation of danger. Team Skull's black is Rocket's black again, but fragmented, irregular, personalized in ways that reflect an organization that cannot enforce uniformity because it is composed of people too individual to accept it. Team Yell's black and white is a sports fan's colors, which is precisely the point. The admins and commanders of each organization represent the middle layer of the villain hierarchy, the people between the ideology of the leadership and the grunt level operational work. They are always the most fully characterized members of the organizations who are not the leaders, and the series has developed a consistent practice of giving them enough specificity to function as their own kind of narrative statement. Team Rocket's admins include Archer and Ariana in Johto, who carry the organization's loyal unto dissolution quality. Team Galactic's commanders include the three-way contrast between Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Team Plasma's 7 sages are a council rather than a command structure. Team Flare's scientists are defined by their research orientation. What is consistent across all of them is the question of what the admin level position represents in terms of personal commitment. The grunts might be there for various reasons, including reasons that have nothing to do with the organization's mission. But the admins have invested enough to reach a position of responsibility. They have made a more active choice. This makes their narratives more morally interesting than the grunts' narratives, because the question of what they are doing with their choice is not answered by accident or circumstance, but by decision. Saturn's decision to stop in Platinum is the clearest example of this. He has authority. He has capacity. He is not stopped from continuing by any external force. He stops because he decides to. The contrast with Mars, who continues to fight until she is defeated, is the contrast between two people who made different choices in the same circumstances, and the game treats this difference without heavy-handedness. It does not explain Saturn's change as redemption. It does not give him a speech about what he learned. It gives him one quiet line of dialogue that communicates the decision, and then he is done, and the narrative moves on. The grunts of the various organizations are, taken together, one of the more quietly observed elements of the villain tradition. In the early games, they were essentially interchangeable, a source of slightly varying patter before the battle that conveyed the organization's worldview in compressed form. But as the series developed, the grunt dialogue became more expressive, more individual, more capable of suggesting a person behind the uniform. Team Skull grunts in particular, with their specific verbal rhythms and their expressions of group pride that keep slipping into something that sounds more like longing, represent the furthest development of this practice. They are, in their dialogue, people, loud, defensive, occasionally funny in a way that is clearly armor, but people. The organization they belong to grew from the specific shape of its members' wounds, and that specificity is visible in every conversation. The recurring presence of the international police officer Looker across multiple games is worth examining as an organizational element of a different kind. Looker represents the institutional response to the villainous organizations, the ongoing effort to address the harm they do through the structures that exist for that purpose. He is in Sinnoh investigating Team Galactic. He is in Onova pursuing the remnants of Team Plasma. He is in Kalos in the post-game content. He appears in Alola and in other locations. He is, in the logic of the games, someone who has been doing this work for a long time, who has been there in the aftermath of multiple villain organization defeats, who carries the accumulated knowledge of what it looks like when the crisis passes and the work of consequence begins. He is also, consistently, too late. He arrives in Sinnoh after the events at Spear Pillar have already been resolved. He is in the Unova region, looking for the remaining Team Plasma Sages, after the game's main conflict is over. This pattern of arriving in the aftermath rather than the crisis is not a failure on his part. It is a structural reflection of how the series understands the difference between the kind of strength that resolves the immediate crisis and the kind that does the long term work. Looker cannot resolve the legendary crisis at Spear Pillar. What he can do is be there for the cleanup, the tracking down of the people who were not defeated in the climactic battle, the slower work of accountability that does not resolve in a single confrontation. The Pokemon games have never been fully consistent about what happens to defeated villain organizations after the credits roll. The game's post-game content sometimes addresses this and sometimes does not. Team Rocket's post-game fate in Kanto is implied rather than shown. Giovanni is gone, and the organization presumably disperses. But the Johto games add the detail that some remnant persisted for 3 years, which means the dispersal was not immediate. Team Magma and Team Aqua are implied to be finished after the legendary crisis is resolved, but neither Omega Ruby nor Alpha Sapphire shows what that ending actually looked like for the hundreds of people who composed them. This ambiguity is not a failure of the games. It is, in a sense, realistic about the way organizations end. They do not end at a moment. They end gradually through a series of decisions and departures and the slow draining of shared purpose as people who were organized around a mission begin to develop other purposes or simply the absence of purpose. The visible defeat of the leader is the moment that marks the end in narrative terms. The actual end for the grunts and admins and scientists and all the other people who were part of the organization takes longer and happens in the background of the world the games depict. What is consistent across all of the organizations is that their legacy is visible in the region after they are gone. The underground of Goldenrod City has the rocket headquarters that the player cleared but that presumably still exists as a physical space. The seafloor cavern where Kyogre was awakened is still there. The distortion world that Cyrus disappeared into is accessible in the post-game. The Pokemon Plasma Frigate is still somewhere in Unova. Team Flare's labs under Lumiose City are cleared, but presumably still structurally present. The world does not restore itself to a pre-villain state once the crisis is over. It continues, carrying the physical evidence of what was attempted and what failed, and the people who live in it continue around that evidence. This is one of the more honest things about the Pokemon villain tradition. The harm done by these organizations is real in the game's terms, and it does not disappear when the organizations are defeated. The Lake Guardians of Sinnoh were hurt, the Pokemon in the lakes were killed, the world came close to ending multiple times, and the closeness of those endings is part of what the regions carry. Sinnoh residents, who were adults during the events of Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, know that someone tried to unmake the universe and came very close to succeeding. Kalos residents, who were present during the events of X and Y, know that the ultimate weapon was activated briefly, and that the potential for mass death was present in their world in a way it had not been for 3,000 years. These events are part of the history these regions will carry forward, whether the games show that history being carried or not. The recurring theme of legacy in the villain tradition connects to one of the series' quieter, ongoing concerns, which is the relationship between the past and the present in a world where the past is preserved in legendary creatures and ancient ruins and mythologies that are still functionally active. The legendary Pokemon are themselves a kind of living history. Dialga and Palkia contain the structures of time and space that have existed since the beginning of the universe. Gruden and Kyogre are ancient forces that predate human civilization. Lugia and Ho-Oh carry the memory of fires and storms from Johto's distant past. These creatures are not just powerful, they are old in a way that makes every human concern, including the most ambitious villain's plan, feel provisional. The organizations that pursue them are, in some sense, trying to use the past to control the present. Giovanni wants Mewtwo, which is a creation made from ancient genetic material. Maxie wants Gruden, which is a geological force from before human history. Cyrus wants Dialga and Palkia, which are the creators of the fundamental conditions of existence. Lusamine wants the Ultra Beasts, which come from a dimension that presumably exists on its own ancient timescale. All of these pursuits have in common the attempt to bring something of a different temporal scale into service of a current plan, and all of them fail because the things they are pursuing do not operate on the timescale of current plans. The player characters, who encounter these creatures in the moment of crisis and are met with what seems like recognition or trust, are not accessing them through historical claims or technological control. They are meeting them now, in the specific present of the encounter, without prior claims and without future plans for what to do with them. This present tense openness is what the legendary encounters reward, and it is structurally opposed to the villain organization's approach of pursuing these creatures as components in plans that extend from a diagnosed past problem to an engineered future solution. The games are, in this reading, consistently arguing that the capacity to be in the present moment is more powerful than any amount of planning, historical knowledge, or technological sophistication. This is not an anti-intellectual argument. The player characters learn things. They develop understanding. They get better. But what they get better at is meeting the next thing well, not at having the right plan for every situation in advance. The villain organizations have extremely good plans in many cases. The plans fail not because the planning was poor, but because planning is not the same thing as being able to meet what is actually there. Arceus, the creator Pokémon of Sinnoh's mythology, who exists at the apex of the legendary hierarchy, and who appears in the game as the ultimate encounter in the Hall of Origin, is perhaps the clearest expression of what the legendary tradition is ultimately about. Arceus does not have a plan. Arceus does not have an agenda for the world it created. It simply exists at a scale that is difficult to comprehend, and it is willing to be encountered by someone who comes to it honestly. The Pokémon that carries the most power in the entire series is the one most defined by openness to encounter. This is the series' final statement on what power is for. The villain leaders who pursued legendary Pokémon, each in their way, were trying to reach Arceus or its children or its creations and direct them toward the leader's designs. None of them, in any main series game, made it to Arceus. The player character can. The player character can climb to the Hall of Origin and meet the creator in a battle that is both the most powerful encounter in the game and the quietest. There is no crisis. There is no villain to stop. There is only the encounter itself between a trainer who has come this far through the accumulated experience of the entire game and the being at the center of everything. This is where the villain tradition and the player tradition most clearly diverge. The villains are always oriented toward the end of the road they have built, toward the destination their planning has specified. The player, arriving at Arceus, has not planned to be here. They have simply kept moving through the world that kept offering the next thing, and the world offered Arceus. The encounter is not a reward for being right. It is a consequence of having been genuinely present throughout. The spin-off regions and their villain organizations deserve a moment of quiet attention before these histories close. Ore has been addressed through Team Cypher's story, but the broader Pokémon world extends beyond the main series in ways that add texture to the villain tradition as a whole. The Ranger regions, the Almia and Fiore and Oblivia of the Ranger game series, each produce their own antagonist organizations that differ from the main series villains in a specific way. They are operating in a world where Pokemon interaction is organized around capture by Styler rather than capture by Pokeball, where the relationship is even more explicitly temporary. The ranger does not keep the Pokemon. The Pokemon is summoned, assists, and returns to the wild. The villains in the ranger world who try to force Pokemon into permanent service are therefore, in the logic of their own cultural context, violating something even more fundamental than the main series villains do. The Go Rock Squad, whose operations in Pokemon Ranger are built around the theft of a Super Styler prototype, represents the first real articulation of this tension in the Ranger setting. Their leader Gordor has built his power around the Super Styler's ability to capture Pokemon through force rather than through the established relationship building method. He occupies a mountain. He prepares to control the legendary beasts. He is stopped by a Pokemon Ranger and a Meenan who uses the Super Styler as a trampoline, which is exactly as absurd as it sounds and is also, in its own way, precisely the right ending for a story about someone who built their power on technology that was always going to be more fragile than the relationships it was designed to replace. Team Dim's son in Pokemon Ranger, Shadows of Almia, is a more sophisticated expression of the same problem. Their leader Blake Hall has built his entire operation around the Gigaremo and Miniremo machines that allow Pokemon to be controlled remotely. He has constructed a power tower powered by a dark crystal and used its energy to control every Pokemon in the Almia region. This is the most complete expression of control as philosophy that the Ranger villain tradition produces, not the acquisition of individual Pokemon for specific purposes, but the imposition of control across all Pokemon everywhere simultaneously. The solution to this particular problem is specific to Almia's context. A Darkrai is attracted to the Dark Crystal's power and uses Dark Void to put Hall into a permanent sleep, which is both poetically appropriate and practically final. The Pokemon Masters game and its Team Break represent the mobile game tradition's entry into the villain tradition. Team Break operates in the Paseo region, the artificial island where the Masters tournament takes place, and their model is the closest to Team Rocket's original commercial logic: steal Pokemon, sell them, profit. What distinguishes Team Break is their method, stealing a Hoopa to use its ring portals as the mechanism for theft, and their organizational structure, which lacks the unified aesthetic of the main series villain teams, and is instead composed of trainers from various classes who share only the black and white masks. They are, in their fragmentation, a reflection of the Paseo context, an artificial island that brings trainers from all over together, creating an environment where an organization can be assembled from whoever happens to be present. The Crown Tundra and Isle of Armor, the Sword and Shield DLC areas, each add to the Galar villainous tradition in ways that are less about organization and more about individual antagonism. Swordward and Shieldbert, the two brothers who appear in the post-game of Sword and Shield, represent a kind of villain whose motivation is specifically aristocratic resentment. They believe themselves to be the rightful representatives of Galar's ancient tradition, descended from the kings who first wielded Zacian and Zamazenta's power, and they react to the events of the main game, which they interpret as evidence that they have been ignored and displaced, by attempting to reignite the darkest day using Pokemon that they have exposed to wishing stars. They are not ideologically sophisticated. They are aggrieved. Their villainy is the villainy of people who believe they were owed something and are responding to not receiving it. What makes them interesting in the context of the broader villain tradition is that they are completely without organizational depth. They are two people. They do not recruit. They do not build. They cause a series of crises, and they are stopped, and they are defeated, and they are, at the end of it, simply two brothers who did something terrible because they felt slighted. In a tradition full of organizations with philosophies and admins and layered hierarchies, Swordward and Shieldbert are the minimum expression of what a Pokemon villain can be: people with a grievance and the recklessness to act on it. The Scarlet and Violet DLC also adds to the Paldea tradition through the Teal Mask and the Indigo Disc content, each of which introduces new antagonistic figures that extend the region's themes in different directions. The figures of Carmine and Kieran and what their story becomes over the course of the DLC represent the Paldea tradition's interest in how people become the things they are. Kieran's arc, from a shy trainer to someone whose desire for strength has consumed his original gentleness, is a small scale version of the villain origin story, rendered with unusual intimacy. He is not a team leader. He is not building an organization. He is a person who wanted something specific: power, recognition, the ability to be in control of his own story, and who pursued it in ways that damaged him. The resolution of his arc is not a battle won by the player, but a relationship repaired, which is the Paldea tradition's consistent answer to the villain question. The DLC's legendary Pokémon, Ogrepon in the Teal Mask, and the legendary 4 of the Indigo Disc, each carry their own small mythologies that connect to the themes of the DLC's narrative. Ogrepon's story, involving masks and the specific kind of grief that comes from being rejected for what you are, resonates with the Team Star theme of the main game in ways that seem deliberate. Paldea, across both its main story and its DLC, is a region organized around the idea that what people become is shaped by what they are given to work with, and that the shape of their damage is the shape of the failure to provide them with what they needed. The villain question in Paldea is always, quietly, who failed them and how? This question, asked consistently across the Paldea content, is a late development in the series' relationship with its villain tradition. The early games had no interest in why Giovanni was the way he was, beyond the structural fact of his organization and his ambitions. The games developed over time into something more interested in the origins of the people who became villains, not to excuse them, but to understand them, to see the specific shape of what they were working from. Paldea has arrived at the position where the question of origin is central to the story rather than background to it. This development in the series mirrors something that the broader culture has been working through in its own relationship with antagonist figures across various media. The move from the villain as pure obstacle, as the entity whose function is to be defeated, to the villain as person, as someone whose story intersects with the hero's story in ways that are not purely oppositional, is a move the Pokémon series has made gradually, and not always evenly but genuinely. The early games are better than their reputation for this, in some cases. Giovanni's duality as gym leader and Rocket Boss is a form of character depth that the games presented in 1996 without calling it that. But the explicit development of villains as people with origins and wounds and genuine ideologies has become more prominent with each generation. The final generations of Pokémon games, whatever they prove to be, will presumably continue this trajectory. The villain tradition has arrived at a place where the organizations are understood as products of specific cultural failures, as expressions of what happens when the values a region claims to hold are not actually instantiated in its structures. Team Star was possible because the Academy failed to protect its students. Team Skull was possible because the Island Challenge failed to include the people who could not complete it. The Ether Foundation's crisis was possible because one person's grief was not addressed by anyone who had the capacity to help. These structural analyses suggest that the series is becoming interested not just in defeating villain organizations, but in understanding what produced them, which is the harder and more interesting question. This harder question does not have easy answers in the game's terms. You cannot unfail the students who became Team Star. You cannot give the people who became Team Skull a second chance at the Island Challenge that would have kept them in the legitimate structures of a lowland society. The damage is real, and it is done. What the games can show, and do show, is what accountability looks like in the aftermath of that damage. Clavel showing up for the students, he failed. Guzma eventually arriving somewhere that is not exactly redemption, but is recognizably different from where he started. Lusamine surviving and being given the beginning of a chance to become someone her children can have a relationship with. These are not triumphant resolutions, they are honest ones, which is a different and more difficult thing to achieve. The Pokemon series, across all the generations and regions and villain organizations and legendary encounters, has been building toward a kind of narrative maturity that allows it to hold complexity without needing to resolve it cleanly. The heroes win, but the world that the heroes win in is still the world that produced the villains, and the games know this. The next generation of stories will be set in that world, and they will produce new villains from its new failures. The cycle does not end, it continues. And in the continuing, in the movement from one region to the next, from one crisis to the next, from one trainer leaving a small town with the first Pokemon beside them to the next one doing the same, the series keeps making its argument about what matters. There is one more thing worth holding before the night fully settles. The legendary encounters that each generation of games builds toward are not simply power checks. They are thematic statements about what the generation's story was actually about. The Mewtwo encounter in the original games is an encounter with something that was created for a purpose it rejected. You are meeting something that knows it was made as a weapon and has decided it is more than that. The story of the encounter in the anime and supplementary materials is the story of a being working out what it is when the purpose it was given is stripped away. The player who reaches Cerulean Cave and finds Mewtwo waiting in the deepest chamber is meeting a question, not just a battle. Ho-Oh, perched on the bell tower in Johto, is an encounter with the idea of revival and the conditions under which sacred things trust again. The three legendary beasts who roam Johto's roots are encounters with creatures that were changed by a catastrophe, burned alive in the brass tower, and brought back different. They are always running. The player has to understand how to approach something that has learned, through catastrophic experience, to flee. The patience required to capture them, the strategy of slowly reducing their options while not frightening them further, is a small meditation on the difference between pursuit and encounter. Rayquaza, appearing in the sky at the peak of Sky Pillar, is the encounter with the creature that stopped the ancient conflict. It is always presented as something above the conflict, neither for the land nor for the sea, existing in a different register entirely. The Sky Pillar is one of the more demanding optional locations in the Huen games, requiring a specific kind of navigation that most players struggle with. The difficulty is the point. What waits at the top is something that can only be reached by people who are willing to fall down and start over repeatedly in a location that does not make its layout easy to understand. The persistence required to get there is a small version of the persistence required to exist in the Pokemon world without closing up when things are hard. The Regis, scattered across Hoenn's more remote locations and accessible only through a series of environmental puzzles that the game barely explains, are encounters with ancientness in its most abstract form. These are not creatures that want anything from the encounter. They are simply old, older than any of the other things in the region, preserved in chambers that predate the current civilization. The player who finds them is finding something that was there before everything around it and will be there after. The encounter is quiet in a way that the more dramatic legendary battles are not. Dialga and Palkia, when they appear after being freed from the red chain, are encounters with a kind of power that the game has been careful to present as fundamentally beyond any villain's agenda. They did not want to be summoned. They did not choose to be used as instruments. The encounter, in the game's terms, is an opportunity to catch them, But the game frames this opportunity carefully. They are damaged by what was done to them, and the encounter is shaped by that damage. To approach them now is to approach something that was hurt. The trainer who meets them here is meeting that hurt directly, and the choice to catch them rather than run from them is, in the game's terms, a form of care. Reshiram and Zekrom, when they choose their champions in black and white, are making a judgment that the game never fully explains, but consistently implies has to do with the quality of the trainer's relationship with their own Pokémon rather than anything abstractly measurable. The legendary is not choosing the strongest, it is choosing the truest, and the truth it is measuring is not philosophical consistency, but relational honesty. How genuine are the bonds the trainer has formed? How much of themselves have they actually brought to the encounters they have had? This is finally the series' answer to every villain who tried to possess or control the legendary creatures. Not that the creatures are too powerful to be controlled, though they are, not that the technology was inadequate, though it was, but that what the legendaries are actually looking for in the people they choose to work with is not what the villains were capable of offering. They were looking for genuine presence, genuine care, genuine openness to whatever the encounter would be. The villains, in their certainty and their planning and their need to have the creatures serve specific purposes, could not provide any of that. They brought too much of themselves to the encounter. The player character, who has been forming genuine bonds across the entire game, and arrives at the legendary encounter already knowing something about what it means to be really present to another being, can provide exactly that. The roots are still open. The night is deep and quiet. The world that all of these histories were told about continues, holding its legendary creatures in their mountains and their oceans and its oldest mythologies, in the ruins that scattered trainers find in the corners of maps, still accumulating what it always has. The world of Pokemon villainy is also, in its totality, a record of what every generation of designers thought was most worth being afraid of. Giovanni represents the fear that power will be used purely for acquisition. Cyrus represents the fear that logic, followed far enough, becomes the enemy of everything human. Getsus represents the fear that genuine ideals can be weaponized by people who hold none. Lysandra represents the fear that a person who loves the world can conclude that most of it should not exist. Lusamine represents the fear that love, without accountability, becomes possession. These are not random selections from a catalog of possible villainy. They are the fears that the people who make Pokemon games thought were most real, most likely most worth putting in front of the millions of young people who would encounter them. A generation of players grew up defeating Team Rocket and learning that criminal organizations exist inside legitimate structures, that the person who runs the last gym might also be the person running the criminal empire, that the surface of things can be different from what lies beneath. Another generation grew up with the Hoenn conflict and learned that people who believe passionately in opposite things can both be wrong in the same way. Another generation grew up with Cyrus and learned that someone can be intelligent and consistent and thorough and still be describing a catastrophe. These are not trivial lessons. They are, in the specific form the games give them, available to people at the age when they are most formative. The Pokemon series did not set out to be a vehicle for ethical education. It set out to be a good game with good creatures and an engaging story. What it produced, across 25 plus years of villain organizations and legendary encounters and trainers starting from small towns, is something that does both. The games are good, and they are, quietly, teaching something real about what power is for and what it costs when it is pursued without care. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed drifting through these quiet moments, there's another video waiting on the left of your screen. Let it play while you rest. You might discover something gentle before sleep takes you again.